Mushoku Tensei Volume 20, cast by Artel Studio. If you are interested in creating your own audio drama like this, please visit www.artel.ai and use promotion code ARTEL to activate your account. Now, enjoy the story. Chapter 1, Plans for the Future and Cliff's Concerns. 1 month had passed since the events in the Ranoa Kingdom. Winter was drawing to a close, and spring was right around the corner. For the past month, I'd focused on crafting a detailed plan with Orsted. Our first order of business, gathering allies. For this, we settled on a 3-pronged approach. The first major goal would be putting together an intelligence agency to gather information. Ruquag's mercenary band, the group that Aisha and Linnea set up, would work nicely for this. Its top brass were all my people, so I might as well use them. I'd have their full cooperation behind the scenes. I'd structure the group's global hierarchy such that headquarters maintained contact with each branch, so it would pull in information from countries around the world. I'd design them so that if I ever couldn't make it to headquarters, I could still visit a branch to learn every detail of the current news. This would be less for Orsted's use and more for mine. I was placing my pieces on the board ready to be played. The second goal was to draw in figures of authority and future leaders. Laplace's resurrection was going to trigger a war, with all of humanity, I suppose. If each nation was prepared, it would only improve their response times when the invasion finally came. So, we'd inform those in power of the coming war and what was at stake. We'd offer whatever little aid we could and have them prepare for what was coming for us in 80 years at whatever pace they could manage. The cooperation of these nations in the coming Laplace War could make our lives as Ruquag's mercenary band easier if we had it, or much, much harder if we didn't. The third prong in the plan was to recruit warriors for combat. This was the primary goal as far as Orsted was concerned. He'd rather other fighters take on Laplace instead of him. If we managed to lift Orsted's curse so he didn't have to fight solo anymore, then we could even have our new recruits join the final battle against the man god. Orsted and I talked over who would be a good fit and finally settled on this profile, the warriors already fated to battle Laplace, but who won't easily become disciples of the man god. For instance, titles such as Ogre God and Ore God. Their current holders had no hate or love for Laplace, but future generations would oppose him later on. Same for schools like Water God Style and Sword God Style. The current practitioners were far removed from Laplace, but their apprentices would face him down as well. We also planned to ask long-living warriors like North God Kalman III or Death God Randolph. Some held personal grudges against Laplace, Ruigerd especially. Ruquag's mercenary band could locate the ones whose whereabouts were unknown, after which I could visit them personally and negotiate on my hands and knees. I imagined that some of them would ask me to make it worth their while. But for now, the plan more or less came down to asking all the strong and capable people that came to mind. Now then, once we assembled all those resources, we'd be faced with final bottleneck, the man god. Knowing him, he was sure to send his disciples to get in our way. For the most part, we didn't know who might end up serving as one of the man god's disciples. Orsted said that he could estimate the odds in any normal loop, but since the disciples in this loop already included people who'd never joined the man god before, it would be hard to tell for certain. If I wanted to carry out my missions, then I had to risk-proof them against disciples that Orsted wouldn't see coming. As for how I could do that, to be honest, I couldn't think of anything. So I decided not to think. I didn't know what standards the man god chose his disciples by. Orsted said he tended to choose those with strong fate, but people with weak fates had already shown up as disciples. I didn't even get how you could measure the strength of someone's fate. It seemed like the kind of rule that only Orsted and the man god would understand. Even if I tried to follow every minute detail, asking Orsted about every little thing would just give him more of a headache. Thinking about it wouldn't get me very far. I was a small piece in this game, but pawns can still make power moves. I could spread a message among the people we ally with. Something like, "Don't believe what comes to you in a dream." Disciples would probably pop up, even so. We just have to confirm it with anyone we find suspicious, and kill them if necessary. A tough job, but I'd do it. Aside from that looming and nasty work, There weren't any downsides to making every ally I could. After all, the man god could only have 3 disciples at a time, which meant that every number added to our forces gave us an advantage. If there were only 5 people on our side, our strength would fall by 20% if one were to betray us and become a disciple. If that disciple joined the enemy forces, the math would look even worse for us. But if there were 10 of us, or maybe 20 of us, maybe 100 or 1,000, basically, the greater our numbers, the less impact a betrayal or 2 would have on our position. True, we'd be screwed if a leader on our side fell under the man god's control and turned 1,000 allies into enemies, so I had to minimize that risk by not giving any one leader too much power. Then again, I was going to be that leader for a while, so I didn't need to worry about it for now. It had become a problem following my death, but there already were plenty of leaders far more suited to the job than I was, and more in line after that. I already had Roxy, after all. Recruitment was just one of many logistical needs. I needed a way to contact Orsted, for instance. Our failure to prevent Pax's death during our last battle happened due to a lack of communication. Of course, it was far from the only cause, but if we'd had some clear way to reach Orsted, we might have been able to stop it. I couldn't rely on Orsted for everything, but our plans were going to have us working separately more and more, so communication would be crucial. It was better to handle a delicate situation after consulting with your team than to trust your gut feeling alone. And if you knew your ally was in danger, you could rush to help. Not that I could imagine Orsted needing me to save him, but even being able to send him some information one way could help him in a pinch. And so, I brought all this up to Orsted. I tried to explain the concept of a phone while asking if something like that already existed, and whether we could make one if it didn't.
So, a magical implement that can send voices or text?
Text alone would be fine, but I figure it'd help if we had some way to share information over long distances. Like if I have to make a tough decision, I'd rather talk it over with someone first. Do you think that's possible? I wasn't optimistic. That would have been too convenient, right?
The dragon folk have a magical implement like that. If we recreate it, then it should be possible to do what you're asking.
Huh. So stuff like that really does exist?
Yes. You've seen one before, too.
For real? When the heck did that happen? Something like that would have been way too handy for me to forget about it.
The monuments to the 7 great powers and the Adventurers Guild.
Oh, those. Now that he mentioned it, I had seen them. The Adventurers Guild cards accepted voice input, and the monuments to the 7 great powers had the same text all over the world. Interesting, though. I didn't know that the Adventurers Guild cards were dragonfolk made. They did seem unusually sci-fi for a world like this.
It'll take some modifications, but I'll try making them.
Huh? You mean you'd make them yourself?
Your arrival already threw a wrench into all of my predictions. I may as well make those things in case we ever need them. Besides, they'll be useful next time, too.
And with that, Orsted offered to make them himself. Definitely a miscalculation I was happy to have made. Knowing that Orsted would still want me as an ally next time made me all the happier.
There's a chance it won't work out, so keep that in mind.
Roger Wilco, boss. That settled the communicator issue. One more thing, though. Given our failure last time, it was clear that there was something else I needed to make, a way to transport the magic armor. Even though I managed to bring the version 1 with me last time, the only use it got was when I traveled in it. Hauling it from the city to the fort was already a huge hassle, but not being able to fit it inside the castle meant that it ended up useless during my fight with Death God Randolph. I didn't think I'd be fighting anyone on the Death God's level anytime soon, but I couldn't rule it out. Given how dire the situation was back then, I wanted to be proactive this time around. Development on the version 3 was still progressing, of course, and its goal was to resolve these issues by being both powerful and lightweight. However, there was still a long way to go before it would be completed. Even with Zanoba's full cooperation, it was still going to take a year or 2 to finish this project. To that, one suggestion came to mind. Why not summon the version 1 as is? According to what Silveril once taught me, physical objects couldn't be summoned, but I felt like, with a little change of perspective it might be possible. I planned to try it out myself, just to be sure. If it didn't work, then that would be that. With that, Plans for gathering allies were finalized. For now, I would expand Ruquag's mercenary band and network with powerful figures and nations around the world. We'd start with Cliff and Ariel, a relative of the Millis Church's pope, and the next ruler of the Asura Kingdom. I was already halfway to being allies with them, and now it was time to officially add them into Orsted's camp. Who first? Cliff, of course. He was stationed nearby. Making Cliff an ally would give us ties to the Millis Church. The holy country of Millis was powerful, which would make them a powerful force in the war against Laplace, too. Battles came down to money and numbers, after all. Having some connections who could provide both wouldn't hurt. Cliff might have said otherwise, but I considered him a close friend. He was already helping out with Orsted's curse, so a verbal agreement was probably all I needed to get him fully aboard. I could already hear him say, "sure," with no hesitation in my head. With my plan settled, I made my way toward the apartment where Cliff lived. I arrived at Cliff's love nest. It was a rare moment of me not catching them in the act. The afternoon apartment was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Then again, if they went at it every day, his neighbors probably wouldn't get much rest. Wait, I'd misremembered. They typically did it in the school's research room this time of day. Maybe it only got busy around here at night? When I entered his room, I was greeted by a gaunt, exhausted Cliff.
Oh, hey, Rudeus?
He seemed like he was doing all right during Ellen Elise's pregnancy right up until his child's birth, but lately he'd been white as a sheet every time I saw him. I was starting to worry about his stamina outside the bedroom, too.
Oh, Rudeus, what's the occasion?
Ellen Elise, on the other hand, had a healthy glow. She had a satisfied look on her face as she held her baby up to her breast. She was naked above the waist and wore only a pair of panties below it. It seemed like I'd caught them in a short break. They were probably going to pick up where they left off once lunch was over. Ah, well, I had something to discuss. That said, I was distracted. The sight of this blonde, dainty beauty bestowing her baby with a nipple was high art. It belonged in a museum. Her lithe elven body certainly didn't help. The tension between her usual sluttery and the almost saintly scene before me was captivating. Seeing Sylphie and Roxy breastfeed gave me that same feeling. Even Eris had been showing that sort of tension lately. She carried that baby and let him get away with suckling her teat without so much as a shout or a slap. Yes, the sight of a woman becoming a mother and offering a breast to her child is enchanting.
Hey, Rudeus.
Huh? Oh, sorry. I'd gotten too lost in thought, and Cliff snapped me back to reality. My bad. I wasn't looking out of horniness. Seriously.
And Lisa, we have a guest over, so could you put some clothes on?
Oh my, Cliff! Are you getting jealous?
Yes, I am. You might only see Rudeus as family, though.
Fine if you insist.
She retreated with her baby into an inner room.
Rudeus, could you please refrain from looking at my wife like a piece of meat when you already have 3 wives of your own?
Piece of meat? Hey, listen. I tried to explain that I had done no such thing, but the fact was that I did look. I wouldn't want people looking at my wives naked either, so it was better to apologize. Never mind, I'm sorry. I'll keep that in mind next time.
Right.
Cliff heaved a sigh as he sank into his sofa. He was certainly tired, but he also seemed to be in a sour mood. Maybe he was having some technical difficulties during his nightlife.
So, what did you come for today?
Oh, well, I just had a little request. An invitation, if you will. Cliff stared back at me with vacant eyes. It felt kind of hard to broach the subject. I considered coming back later, but I figured I ought to ask why he seemed so bothered first. Did something happen?
Nothing. On second thought, your timing's perfect. It's something I have to tell you about anyway.
It felt like he was leading into something serious, like how Zanoba was recently summoned by his family. The truth is, a letter came in from my grandfather in the holy country of Millis. It was following the same pattern, too. That could only mean one thing. This was designed to lure Cliff away. Was it another war? Or was it a trap laid by the man god? No matter. Either way, I was planning to ask Cliff to build some bridges between me and the holy country of Millis. He apparently had the same idea, so he wouldn't waste time by asking me to tag along. I would have liked for him to stay in Sharia, of course, but I had a goal to pursue. Cliff stood up and pulled a single letter from off his shelf. It gave me another hit of déjà vu. I could guess the contents of the letter without reading a single word. Do you know how much money it cost your grandfather to raise you? And why it cost money? So that you would grow to be an asset to our faction. And when do we need that asset? Right now! I had to prepare for the worst before looking.
Oh, it's not that serious a problem or anything. It's just that we agreed a long time ago that I'd return once I graduated. I'm only worried about my travel budget and any dangers on the road.
I took a look at the letter. It started off asking after Cliff's health. After that, it instructed him to show the enclosed insignia of the Millis Faith Curia at a Millis church if he ever ran low on travel funds. It said Millishian was currently embroiled in a power struggle, and that they were on the losing side. Then, a stern warning. Cliff had to prepare for the worst if he intended to come home, and if he couldn't, then he shouldn't bother. Cliff's grandfather concluded the letter by saying that despite the harsh words, he longed to see Cliff again, and that he was awaiting his return from the bottom of his heart. Every word on the page bled concern for Cliff. I'd never met Cliff's grandfather, but if he could write such a heartfelt letter, then I was sure he had to be a good person. What could be the problem with this?
Honestly, I've been going back and forth. I was planning to return home the moment I graduated. It's what I'd trained so hard for. It's what I'd wanted this whole time until now. I was confident that I could even make it in the cutthroat world of the Millis Church.
Figures. Cliff had been talking about it from the beginning. Once he graduated the academy, he'd return to the holy country of Millis and follow in his grandfather's footsteps. Though, of course, he understood how difficult papal succession had become lately, so he'd been diligently training for the humble profession of priesthood as well.
But I've gotten married. I even have a child.
I instantly understood what he was worried about. It was the same kind of worry that I'd always been plagued by.
The Millis Church, they have no qualms with targeting the families of the weak, of their enemies. Lise would be fine. She knows how to protect herself. But Clive, he's not old enough to walk on his own 2 feet. I'm not confident that I can protect him.
I understood his concern. You always want to keep your loved ones safe.
I haven't even told my grandfather I'm married. If word got out that the Millis Pope's grandson got married to an elf, he could have a scandal on his hands, one that could force him to flee the country.
The Millis faith was pretty rough on other races. Elves might typically face less discrimination due to being a forest-dwelling race, but I'd heard that there were extremists who persecuted them just because they weren't human. And given that Elenalise wasn't exactly in great standing among the elves, the reality awaiting Cliff and his family was harsh.
I've been thinking about it over and over. Should I go back? Should I not go back? Then Lise comforts me when I just don't know anymore. It's all I've been thinking about lately. It's a bit late to realize this, but I think I get what made Zanoba so stubborn about going back to Sharona.
I was sure that Cliff personally wanted to return, even if he wasn't set on it, but doing so would put his wife and son in danger. Worse yet, his choice of wife could even put his grandfather at risk. Would it be right to stay committed to his old dreams? Impossible to say. Even I didn't know the answer. But what I came here to discuss also touched upon that very question. I was finally in a position to offer him a lifeline. Cliff?
What?
I'd like you to join Orsted's army in a formal capacity. Cliff stared blankly in response. It might have been a clunky choice of words on my part, but I didn't want to confuse him by asking him to join my cause or something. I had to be clear.
What do you mean?
If you become Orsted's subordinate, then Orsted and I can offer you our full support. You'll be able to protect Elenalise and Clive while also leading your grandfather's camp to victory.
If I accepted your help, what would I need to do?
Once you assume power, you'll have to prepare for Laplace's eventual resurrection. From there, I explained my plan, the one centered on Orsted 80 years from now. I'd mentioned the man-god to Cliff before, but this time, I explained everything in detail from the beginning. Once I was done telling him everything, Cliff looked deep in thought. So, what do you think? Cliff didn't answer right away. He crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and mumbled in consternation. I thought it was a pretty good deal. Cliff knew that his vague disdain for Orsted was due to Orsted's curse. He didn't know what Orsted was really like without the curse. But even if you took him out of the equation, I wouldn't betray Cliff. I would have been sad if he had questions about that.
Can you give me some more time? The graduation ceremony's happening soon. I'll make a decision by then.
He gave me a clear deadline, so I had no choice but accept it. I had to wonder why he couldn't let himself simply nod and agree. But perhaps Cliff himself didn't understand his hesitation. In that case, you should talk it over with Elenalise, too. There's no reason to carry the whole burden yourself.
Huh? Oh, yeah, that's right. Thanks.
This time, Cliff simply nodded as a faint smile crept across his face. Elenalise probably overheard our discussion. I'd noticed flashes of blonde hair peeking out from behind a cracked-open door down the hall. I was sure that someone like her could make Cliff see sense. They might not end up where I'd like, but hey, that'd be fine too. All right, I'll come back later.
Sure. Sorry about all this.
Don't worry. I know it's hard, but we're all in this together. With that, I left Cliff's room, though not before giving the heads up to Elenalise. I'd wait until the graduation ceremony for Cliff's answer. That was about 2 months out, so I figured I'd get things rolling on another project. For that one, I needed Zanoba's assistance. Chapter 2. The Zanoba Store. Zanoba was no longer a prince. He'd been spending his days pawning off his royal relics so he could build a house near my own. A stout, 2-story place. He designed it with figurine production in mind, so the first floor was wide and spacious, like a garage. The living space was primarily on the second floor, where he planned to house Ginger, Julie, and himself. It seemed roomy enough for the three of them. I didn't know how their relationships would change over time, though. Might get a little strange if any of them got married. Anyway, while he had enough money for now, whether it was from savings or from a royal allowance, it was only going to down from here. I decided to pay rent to him for the magic armor production, which I also categorized as research costs. Zanoba accepted the money, but not without some objection.
I'm not the only one working on this, so I can't help but feel it wrong to be the one to accept money for it.
I caught his drift. The creation of the magic armor was a team effort between Zanoba, Cliff, and myself. But here, only Zanoba was receiving R&D funding. It didn't add up. But by that logic, what really didn't add up was me. I went out and did work in the magic armor, and I was the one getting compensated for it. In other words, I was the only one receiving money from the magic armor's creation until now. A creation that we had all worked together to make. The magic armor wasn't created for financial gain, but it's in our nature as humans to go at each other's throats over an extra coin. If I wanted to be fair about it, then I should have paid Cliff too, though Cliff was hardly pressed for money, of course, so I wasn't sure he'd take it. Well, that aside, there are times in life where you just have to pay up if you're asked. And hey, nobody I knew was greedy enough to take advantage of myself. I had enough wiggle room in my pocketbook to be charitable. Yes, we all have a duty to give back when we've got some financial freedom. Either way, I needed the magic armor, and I also needed Zanoba's figurine engineering skills. It's only natural to pay money for something you need, and with that, I could consider Zanoba's lifestyle paid for. I now stood before the front door of that figurine engineer's home. I took a deep breath. I'd been told I was free to enter as I pleased, even when the head of the house was absent, but there was one rule: knock before entry. It was simply proper etiquette between two amicable compatriots. Zenobia, Yoo-hoo, open up already!
Oh, master. Please, by all means. The door's already open.
His response was incredibly quick. However, I needed a little more than that. You sewer? Can I really come inside? Watch out, I'm gonna do. Stop me while you cave in. Once I get started, I can't hold myself. Back! Not getting consent last time led to a mishap I nearly could have been locked up over.
I have no idea what you would possibly be referring to, but I won't stop you, so do come in.
You sure? There's no woman next to you getting dressed, is there?
You've nothing to worry about.
I felt that. I believed Zanoba. That's right, I'd placed my trust in him once again. in the man who never stopped believing in me when I got that diary from the future. If black became white and the world were inverted, I'd know that there was still a lone man worth believing in. Zanoba. Hokey doke, here I come. I opened the door. This place was Zanoba's workshop from the first step inside. It was a wide-open space with 2 work desks amidst a sea of wooden boxes and figurines strewn all over. Zanoba sat in front of one of the desks. Julie was with him. That alone wouldn't have been out of the ordinary, but the atmosphere about the workshop was a bit different today. If I had to put my finger on it, I'd say the problem was in where Julie was sitting. Normally, Julie would be making figurines at the desk just a short distance away from Zanobatis, but today she wasn't sitting at that desk. Julie was sitting on Zanoba's lap. She was sitting on his lap while looking intently at the figurine she was painting. Zanoba, by the way, was carefully carving away at a magic armor part above her head. The scraps of his carvings were dropping on top of her head, but Julie didn't seem to notice. Zanoba, you sure got close to Julie while I wasn't looking, huh?
Does that pose a problem?
Julie's small frame nested within Zanoba's tall stature. They looked like siblings. Wholesome. You know, as long as the only thing they did in that position was make figurines together. But yeah, it was safe to say that there was no hint of lewdness here. I mean, not that it had been a problem for them if there had been. This world didn't have any age of consent laws, so nobody would have held it against him. But just, you see, I did knock, so I wish they could have separated a little. Nah, you're a heartwarming sight. I pulled up a chair from the corner of the workshop.
So, Master, what brings you here today?
About that. Of course, I didn't come to Zanoba's to talk about the weather. I'd already tasked him with the magic armor manufacturing project, but I had another job I wanted to give him that he'd work on in parallel. The truth is, Zanoba, I came to inform you of your new position.
Position, you say?
Yes, position. I confirmed as I pulled a single piece of paper out of my breast pocket. I held it up to Zanoba as though it were an offering.
Pardon my manners.
Zanoba hurriedly plopped Julie down and brushed the scrapings off of himself before gracefully accepting the paper. The guy had a sense of refinement.
It says that Zanoba Sharon is to be assigned to the figurine sales department.
Indeed. I implore you to accept.
I wouldn't be unwilling to do so, but did we not intend to postpone that project?
This reassignment effectively meant that we'd begin moving forward with the plans to sell those Rudeus Greyrat figurines that we had made so long ago. He might have wondered why we were doing that now, at this moment. But actually, selling those specific figurines at this specific time was crucial. We were going to be enlisting leaders from around the world while also nabbing every ally we laid eyes on for the battle against Laplace. However, there were a few people whose whereabouts were unknown, including, yes, Rudeus Greyrat. Rudeus Greyrat spent typical timelines on the Demon Continent, but in this loop, he warped with me to the Central One. I hadn't heard from him lately, nor did I know where he was. I didn't think there was any chance of the worst coming to pass with him, but the fact remained that I couldn't meet him and ask for his help right this very moment. Well, it wasn't like he was in hiding. We could find him easily with just a little searching, but I couldn't deny it. He was the first person I wanted to ask for help in defeating Laplace. This was Rudeus Greyrat, after all. Laplace and him had a history together. I wanted to do whatever it took to find him and ask him directly. I wanted to give him the chance to get his revenge. Well, that was half an excuse. Deep down, I really just wanted to see Rudeus Greyrat again after all these years. And maybe a mutual goal could set us side by side on the same path again, if only for just a little while. So my motives were selfish, but that was how we began selling the Rudeus Greyrat figurines. And hey, it was sure to be faster than organizing a search party. Not to mention that repairing the image of the Supertone was something I'd been planning for a while. I had other excuses for Zanoba too, just in case he needed more convincing. Take, for example, the magic armor. Me, Zanoba, and Cliff had all reached a standstill in the development of this weapon. There was a very real possibility that the version 3 wouldn't be completed at all. But what luck! In came these large-scale plans to sell figurines. Reaching the scale required for distribution and sales meant hiring and training engineers. Remember, the engineering techniques for dolls and figurines could be carried right over to the engineering of the magic armor. By increasing the number of specialists who understood our engineering and having more iterations for trial and error, we increased the odds of finding a revolutionary breakthrough. Developing talent was key. And that about covers the plan. While I do have personal reasons for wanting to do this, I want to grow our engineering expertise for the magic armor project. I wanted to ask you because you understand this better than anyone else. I'll search the Rudeus mercenary band for someone with prior business experience to support you. And of course, Aisha and I will help you to get the first store up and running. So, will you do it?
Indeed, it shall be done.
Zanoba nodded without hesitation and kneeled before me. Julie, after watching from the sidelines, hurriedly took to her own knee as well.
Grand Master, what is it that I shall do?
Julie, you are to stay with Zanoba and follow his directions.
Okay.
It looked like Julie was all in as well. We'd be heading into mass production of the first lot of Rudeus Greyrat figurines soon, which meant that she'd be working to make Zanoba money. She'd surely be excited to hear that. All right then, we'll go over the details on a later date. That's all for today.
Understood.
Next, I figured I would bring over that mercenary that I'd had my eye on. Several days later, I returned to Zanoba's house with two people in tow. On one side was a fearful-looking man in round glasses. He shaped his hair into a 7/3 part instead of a bowl cut. He wore a black coat with yellow embroidery. He was clearly human. This is where you'll be working from now on.
All right.
Listen well, Joseph. It would be no exaggeration to say that this massive project rests upon your shoulders. But you needn't worry more than necessary. After all, to our great benefactor, this is but one project of many. This was Joseph, an anxious temperament and a nasty drinking problem combined to make him frequently pallid, which led to Pale becoming a cutesy nickname of his among the mercenaries. Before joining the mercenary band, he was a merchant. Merchants in this world typically started their careers as traveling salesmen. If they saved their money and gained enough status in their guilds or trades, they could become the employee or apprentice of a high-profile merchant, and by amassing even more resources and experience, they could finally open their own store. If a store owner could maintain that momentum, they could end up owning a larger store, becoming a company executive, or even being selected as a personal supplier for the royal family. Joseph seemed to have made it to the store ownership stage, but then he made one big mistake that cost him everything. Whenever he was asked where he went wrong, he'd always shut down and go silent. But there was no doubt that it was over. A woman, or so Linnea had told me. Of course, if you knew Linnea's reputation, her theories had the strength of a wet paper bag. My guess was that his mistake involved alcohol. He might have drunken himself into a stupor and put his hands on a female employee, only to find out it was a setup to get dirt on him. Wait, that sounded like what Linnea told me. Never mind. Either way, after losing it all, Joseph here wandered around until finding his way to the mercenary band. According to Aisha, he was incredibly skilled at management and finances, so it didn't seem like he was lying about owning a store. And considering how high Aisha's standards for skills were, that praise meant a lot. Well, on second thought, Aisha considered me skilled, so that's what that praise was worth. Anyway, this all led to him getting picked out from the crowd to be the advisor for the grand opening of Zanoba's first store.
Ah, are you sure? I've heard that Mr. Zanoba can be a fearsome individual, that when he gets angry, he'll flatten people into the ceiling like pancakes.
Joseph, my boy, those are merely rumors. In what world would a man slam someone into the ceiling when angered? If someone was truly angry, wouldn't they slam people into the ground instead? Exactly! The ground's much harder!
You're right, yeah.
Of course I was right. Zanoba only slammed people into the ceiling when jumping for joy. His preferred move when angry was an iron claw to the face. That said, it's best to not get him angry in the first place. But that goes for anyone, no? You've been a salesman before, so I'm sure you agree that it's best to keep your customers smiling?
No. There are times where it's best to anger them.
Are there? Now?
People can make poor decisions when they're angry, especially enemies. Getting them angry can cloud their judgment and give you the upper hand in negotiations.
Interesting. Might apply to enemies. But we weren't talking about enemies now, were we? Is Zanoba an enemy?
No, my apologies. I didn't mean to be pedantic.
Oh, it's nothing to worry about. I was wrong, after all. Yes, some enemies are best handled when they're angry. Very true.
Right. But of course, Mr. Zanoba is no enemy, so I do intend to avoid angering him. It's just that when I was with the mercenaries, everything I did got someone mad at me.
True, he didn't seem like he'd fit in easily with the reckless heroes that made up our mercenary band. Probably because he was so timid and reserved. I remember how awful he was during my first interview with him, after Aisha suggested him to me. The color on his face as he entered the captain's room had gone past pale and straight to white, like he was a walking corpse. He started the conversation from the assumption that he was surely about to be punished for some mistake he'd made, so he kept a faint, rictus smile pinned to his lips at all times as he kissed ass. I had my doubts about the guy, to say the least. Even Aisha attempted to walk back her recommendation of him. He was a salesman dropout. That is to say, he was a screw-up. Advice from failures is usually unreliable. If someone didn't understand exactly why they failed, then they were liable to repeat their mistakes. I was speaking from experience, but failure was also a fact of life. The maturity of someone with a lot of failures to draw from is worth its weight in gold. We'd never grow if we let failure stop us. You didn't need a 100% success rate. 60% is still a passing mark, even when the test is changing the world. A taste of success changes people. I felt that if I could give this man that taste, he'd grow into an exceptional asset. I chose him for this project, not in spite of his past, but because of it. Our benefactor is forgiving of failures, and he makes sure success doesn't go unrewarded. If you're able to make this project a success, you could find yourself managing the mercenary band's marketing division.
Well, why? I'm not certain I'd be fit for that position.
Perhaps, but you didn't refuse the opportunity. You're here. That speaks for itself. It was quite the profound line to end on, if I did say so myself. Well, it was profound until a certain someone ruined it. That someone was Linnea.
Don't sweat it, Mew. Zanoba's like a little bro to Mew. Keep your chin up, and if anything happens, just let me at him. I'll give him the old 1-2, Mew.
For some reason, she tagged along when I first set this project up, acting like some business guru the whole time. Considering that her first foray into an honest line of work ended before it ever started, her bluster made her come off as a know-it-all novice.
Boss, thank you so much. I feel so relieved.
Joseph seemed comforted that she was here, and she did have some authority I didn't want to undermine, so for the moment, I decided to let her talk nonsense without interjecting. She was getting the boot if she got in the way, though. Now then, shall we enter? Hey, Zanoba, you know that thing we talked about? It was then that I realized I had messed up. Once again, I had opened the door without knocking, and before our eyes beyond the door that had opened with a clank lay an unbelievable sight. Inside the first floor of Zanoba's home were Zanoba and Julie, who were sitting down and working on their own figurines. This time she wasn't sitting on Zanoba's lap. That part was fine, but someone else made me stop in my tracks the moment I entered. Ginger.
Well, what is it?
Ginger, with a stuffed animal. Oh no, that wasn't to say they didn't belong together, but it was an unexpected sight. I felt like I'd walked in on something. I could have sworn that Ginger had no interest in these sorts of things. Maybe Zanoba no longer being a prince had given her a change of heart. Yes, after calming down and giving it some thought, it felt natural. Besides, it wasn't right to judge someone for their tastes.
Ha ha ha. What's a knight doing coddling a stuffed animal, Mew? What is she, a big guide, Mew? Boss, what's the big idea, Mew? Just wait a sec.
I gave Linnea the boot. Incidentally, beast folk had a form of play in which they practiced hunting on dolls of demons and animals. It was a game that very small children would play, so I couldn't hold it against her. She wasn't making fun of Ginger's tastes. She was just speaking from her experience as a beast woman. Not to say that her words had no bite. Ginger glowed with unbearable humiliation. I had to cheer her back up. Ahem, that's a lovely stuffed animal you have there. From where might you have procured it? Ooh, I sounded a bit like Zanoba there.
It was an import from the Asura Kingdom. Its creator was someone named Venger, who used blanket rags to make dolls like this, or something.
Venger, eh? Quite a similar name to Ginger, isn't it?
Yes, that's why I have taken a bit of a liking to it. Is it really that childish?
Oh, by no means. Pay no attention to what some insensitive cat tells you. She has no taste. I believe you should love what you love.
Oh, yes, thank you very much.
I could tell that Zanoba had a smile on his face as he overheard us. It was the face of a hobbyist watching a friend fall down the rabbit hole of a hobby of their own. He must have been happy to see Ginger take an interest in dolls. Well, a stuffed animal, not quite a doll.
Rudeus, who might this person be?
Ah, I'll introduce you. Zanoba?
Right!
He rose up the instant I called his name, dusted the shavings off of his clothes, and joined us. Julie trotted along behind him. This is Joseph. He's one of the most knowledgeable people in the mercenary band when it comes to marketing. I'm assigning him to be your advisor for the figurine selling project. A glint of light shone in Zanoba's glasses. He weighed Joseph with his gaze. Julie imitated Zanoba's glare in miniature. Cute.
Master, pardon my rudeness, but may I inquire as to his figurine expertise?
Total novice.
Well, now, I trust that you have your reasons, Master. Might I inquire as to why you chose a novice?
This was unusual. Knowing Zanoba, I figured he would have accepted Joseph by the second reply, something along the lines of trusting me to have my reasons, but choosing not to ask what they were.
Pardon, but I simply must ask. This work is not mere child's play to me, you see.
I'll explain, of course. Zanoba was taking this job seriously. Joining Orsted's army was a step toward avenging Pax's death, and that choice was not made lightly. Zanoba wasn't putting his foot down just because he didn't want a Philistine who didn't understand true art criticizing his work, right? First, as a former salesman, he's well versed in marketing. Second, he once failed as a salesman, so he'll be careful. Last, as a complete novice to the world of figurines, he'll be able to provide a fresh perspective.
A fresh perspective, you say?
Yes, the people this project aims to market to aren't all going to be enthusiasts like you. They'll mostly be casuals. Some of the people we're aiming for might lack any interest in figurines whatsoever. The question is, how do we sell to those people? If we come up with an idea that wouldn't make Joseph here want to buy it, then it wouldn't sell to other casuals either.
I see! Another brilliant idea, Master! Indeed, sometimes an almost childlike perspective is necessary to spread art.
Julie followed Zanoba's lead with a profound nod of her head. I took this to mean that Zanoba had given the okay in his own way. Then again, we hadn't even done anything yet, so there wasn't much to greenlight. Joseph, this is Zanoba. He'll be your boss from now on.
All right, a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I promise to put my heart and soul into this work.
Joseph gave Zanoba the mercenary band's signature bow. It was beautifully done, a sign that Linnea had been teaching them well.
Indeed, I am Zanoba. Let us join hands and blanket the world with figurines.
And with that, the two men shook hands. But I had to hope Zanoba wasn't mistaking the goal of this project here. Spreading figurines was important, but this was also supposed to be a separate source of income from the mercenary band, a way to ally with influential business organizations, and a way to train future engineers. Remember? Then again, I had my own reasons too. My goal was to see Ruigerd one more time.
Wait, if marketing was the point here, then there's no reason that figurines had to be our product of choice.
Now then, let's talk about the plan to open our first store. Introductions were out of the way, so it was time to get to work. First, these are going to be our main products. We want to sell these primarily to the common people. The three of us were gathered around a large desk in the studio that made up the first floor of Zanoba's house. I placed a Ruigerd figurine and a single picture book on top of it. The book contained the tales of Ruigerd's heroics that Norn had written. We planned to sell the book and the figurine as a set. It was an idea that I'd had brewing for a while. Of course, we had Norn's permission to sell the book. This world might not have had copyright laws, but we should stick to some principles.
I see.
Joseph picked up the book and flipped through its pages.
So, it's a story about how the Superdit weren't actually terrifying devils, but instead the heroes who lead the world during the final battle. Are you sure it's a good idea to sell this?
We've gotten permission.
Whose?
Lord Perugius's, of course. Joseph frowned. But who else was I supposed to ask? Lord Perugius was the only person in the book who was still alive. He was the only one who could give the rights to anyone's likenesses. Not that those rights existed in this world, but still.
Won't this draw some flack from the Millis Church?
That's true. There are people who won't like us selling something that sings the praises of devils. But the Millis Church isn't the only group that treats the Super that way. And anyway, the story itself borrows passages from the Millis Bible to show how the hero's actions are right according to its teachings. Norn was a follower of Millis, so she sprinkled phrases of its teachings throughout her work. The story was respectful toward the faith. Anyone who sat down and read it would come away thinking that Millis was a wonderful religion. Too bad they wouldn't accept me, though. Too many wives.
Is that so? I'm not a follower of Millis, so I can't say either way, but if it does, that should be fine.
Honestly, I was expecting we'd get Millis justice warriors bitching over every problematic detail, regardless of whether they'd read the book or not. However, taking that crowd at face value is always a waste of time. I wanted this to sell. I wanted to restore the Super Tribe's good name. If we couldn't come together, then we'd inevitably fight each other. That said, we're considering where and how to most effectively sell these. Joseph, we'd like to hear your honest opinion. Joseph looked back and forth between the figurine and the book as he thought. Eventually, he raised his head and gave it to us straight.
They won't sell. Not like this.
Well, now, this was a surprise.
Now, listen.
Now, give him a moment. I held Zanoba back. I wanted to hear the guy out.
First off, books are never going to move. There aren't even that many people who can read. You plan to sell this to casuals instead of enthusiasts, no? It could garner a few sales from the nobility class, but if your target audience is commoners, then it'll be quite difficult.
So, it'd only sell among nobles and enthusiasts, huh? That would have been fine if our only goal was money, but I was after something else. It'd defeat the purpose if the book could only reach a limited audience.
Master, might you have forgotten something?
A glint of light shone across Zanoba's glasses. Not on purpose, his glasses just reflected more light after he stepped forward.
I believe you once suggested that we could attach something like this along to the...
Zanoba took the book Joseph was holding and flipped through it. He stopped on the final page. Joseph held his breath as Zanoba spread its contents out for the rest of us.
Is this a reading worksheet?
Oh yes, this was a worksheet designed for learning to read. It contained pronunciations, grammar rules, stroke order, and even practice exercises. It wasn't going to teach someone to breeze through academic tomes, but they should be able to read something simple by studying alongside it. Honestly, I was pretty proud of it. This felt like an achievement. The theory summarized on that worksheet was what taught Ghislaine de Daldea, of all people, to read. Enough said.
Reading textbooks differ from country to country, but this is rather easy to understand. If this comes with the book, then I think we can consider our literacy hurdles cleared.
Aw, you're making me blush. However, his gaze grew stern when he considered the figurine.
But to be perfectly honest, I don't believe that selling the book and the figurine together is going to work. The people who want the book will be different from the people who want the figurine.
Of course, that should have been obvious. It could even bother people to be stuck with a bulky figurine when all they wanted to buy was a book.
But wait, we can't know until we try, can we? Considering that it teaches people to read, I'm sure many people would purchase it for their children. Including a figurine to catch their children's attention shouldn't be entirely disregarded.
I see, children. Yes, that's an idea. But in that case, shouldn't the figurine be a little more palatable to children? This one is just a tad scary.
Joseph fiddled with the figurine's head as he spoke, but he shuddered when the figure's carefully sculpted hairpiece popped out of its slot.
Would this not be perfect for a young boy who dreams of becoming a hero?
Boys aren't the only children in the world, though. I think it'd be best to have another figurine that girls would want.
One that girls would want, huh? I guess something fashionable, like a Blairby doll. Or maybe something small and cute in a mascot character sort of way. I wasn't too sure what young girls liked. I made a note to ask Lucy about what she'd want later. As we worked, I could tell Joseph's sense of trepidation from earlier had vanished. He and Zanoba seemed to make a better pair than I'd expected. Just to make sure, I tried staying silent and letting them discuss it between themselves.
So, what format do you plan to sell these in?
For now, we want to sell these normally in a store. Should we have spare stock, we could also start an open-air stall to sell them.
A stall, you say? I'm afraid... No, there are many adventurers who can't read, so that should work. Most didn't have the opportunity to attend school.
Where do you suppose a good location for the store would be?
Somewhere with plenty of foot traffic would be a good start. But I've been told that gaining more engineers is another goal of this project. In that case, a good place to open the first shop here in Sharia should be the workshop district.
We wish to expand our capacity as a workshop. We're prepared to go into mass production, and if resources allow, we'll even go right for opening a store on the main street.
Yes, I see that. The problem would be where exactly on the main street we would open the store. We won't make many friends in the Commerce Guild if we come out of nowhere and throw money around to land a good spot. But location is important.
Then perhaps we could consider the Ranoa Kingdom?
Well, true. Securing a store in the Ranoa Kingdom would draw more customers than Sharia ever could. But once the shipping costs are factored in, it's impractical. It would take months to travel to the Ranoa Kingdom from here.
If that's the trouble, then we could simply manufacture in the Ranoa Kingdom as well. Fortunately, the Master and I are old acquaintances with the land's next ruler. It'll be easier to work there than in Sharia.
Joseph glanced at me.
I was told you were a mysterious bunch, but this is... No, never mind. They don't call you the right hand of the dragon god for nothing. But yes, attaining some achievements in the Ranoa Kingdom could make it easier to operate in Sharia, so...
The two were working out the details between themselves without even noticing that I backed off. Zanoba would listen to Joseph's ideas, offer his kudos, and then summarize his own thoughts. Joseph seemed to be far livelier here than he ever was in the mercenary band. Yes, it was looking like I'd made the right call. Seeing how nervous he was during that interview had me a bit concerned, but he really did love business. Loving something is the first step toward getting good at it. He might fail again, but that'd be fine in its own way.
All right, I believe that shall settle our plans for now. What say you, chum?
Whoops, I'd spaced out. I glanced at Ginger and Julie for a hint. Julie had a worried look on her face, as though she didn't quite understand what was going on. Ginger's expression, however, was unconcerned. Ginger, what's your take?
I can't say for sure since I'm still early in my studies, but from what I've heard, I think it should go well.
Oh, so she'd been studying. You go, Ginger. I needed to find a chance to keep up my studies as well, and the spare time to do it. Good point. My business studies have been lacking, so I can't make the call. We should tell our plans to Aisha for now, and if she gives us the rubber stamp, we'll move forward from there. I'd go ask Aisha for her thoughts as reference. Until then, I had a bit of studying to do about trade in this world. It wouldn't make me more than a novice, though. A novice is better referring to their reading than to their own judgment. What was important was that I could be content with hiring Joseph as our advisor for now. Our advisor who came with Aisha's seal of approval. At that, Zanoba, the manager of the project, agreed with the decision. The only action left for me as the leader of the project was to approve it all and wait for the results. Zanoba, Joseph, I hate to dump all the work on you, but I'll let you two handle the business side. I hope you can set this project on the right path.
As you wish.
I'll try.
If you need any resources, personnel, or connections, don't hesitate to ask. I'll make something happen for you. I wasn't planning to dump all the work onto them. If anything, I wanted to run this project myself, but there were too many other things I had to do. Handling them all myself wasn't an option. There were sure to be more ventures that I'd have to trust my employees to operate, so this was an important first step for me.
Chairman, when the time comes to prepare our store, I believe a name will be necessary. Can you think of an exciting one?
The Zanoba store?
Hmm.
Christened and ready for launch. Of all the things we could name a store, this was definitely one of them. With the discussion wrapped up, I turned to leave and found my eyes meeting a pair that were peeking in from a crack in the door. Oops. Sorry, I forgot. I opened the door. Lenia glared at me at first, but she sighed and slumped her shoulders soon enough.
Well, it looks like Joseph got a warm welcome, so I can't complain, Mew.
My, it's almost like you've matured.
Of course I have. I'm the boss of the mercenary band. It's part of my job to make sure my men don't get persecuted at their new posts, Mew.
I see, so that was why she tagged along. If that was her motivation, I felt kind of bad about kicking her out. Still, I was impressed that Linnea had already started to take her position at the top of an organization seriously. My joy at this development stuck with me all the way home. The Zanoba store's first outlet was located in the workshop district. For the building, we modified a warehouse on the workshop district's outskirts. Our focus in the magic city of Sharia would be headquarters and workshop duties, with plans to further expand into the Asura Kingdom later on. I'd probably need to call on Ariel for her assistance. The Rudeus figurine project was now out of my hands. I was nervous because it was still in its infancy, but I let it go and prayed it wouldn't end in disaster. Chapter 3, Cliff and the Institute of Magic Student Council. One day, Cliff visited the teacher's office. Graduation loomed on the horizon, so it was time for the special students to submit their research reports. The subject of Cliff's report was research into the suppression of curses via magical implements. The teachers immediately started poring over the report and passing copies around, all while giving Cliff glowing praise. The submission soon sparked an impromptu Q&A session and debate, whipping the staff room into a fervor. Cliff even heard one teacher say that the results of his research would make history, but the head teacher, Genius, had something else to say.
I apologize that I cannot do more in light of such groundbreaking research, but the valedictorian has already been selected.
This year's valedictorian would be someone named Brooklyn von Elzas from the Duchy of Neris. Cliff knew that name. It was someone he'd spent the past few years competing with over test scores. Cliff recalled that he'd never once lost to Brooklyn.
I'm sorry, perhaps this might not be the place to speak of it, but you held the most outstanding grades out of the entire graduating class. You should be proud.
Cliff's only response to this news was an, "All right, I see," before leaving the staff room. The old Cliff might have thrown an almighty fit at the teachers, but the past 7 years had changed him. Furthering his studies, making new friends, and working as a priest had given him many new experiences. From those experiences came maturity. The school had their position to consider. Running a university wasn't cheap. Countries were powerful. People were not equal. You had to accept your lot in life and press on.
Besides, I don't see much value in the University of Magic valedictorian title. I have friends who lacked titles but were no less amazing. One in particular currently had the title of Right Hand of the Dragon God, but that wasn't a job he'd applied for. It was simply the outcome of his actions. Absolutely, the fruit of experience. Thinking about it, I can't help but laugh at how foolish chasing mere titles was. If I had one misgiving, it was that my research wasn't finished. My thesis was called Research into the Suppression of Curses via Magical Implements. If I could have tweaked it just a bit, if I could have replaced suppression with removal, then I would have had no regrets. But sadly, my incomplete research meant I couldn't speak in absolutes. Still, I'd accomplished something. Both Ellen Elise and Orsted had thanked me for easing their curses, but the end goal still eluded my grasp.
Cliff sidled up to the windowsill and stared outside. The grounds of the University of Magic had hardly changed in the past 7 years.
You know, I was a lot cockier when I first came here. Back then, I knew absolutely I was a genius. But the years had beaten me down, making me painfully aware that I was nothing special. Sure, compared to other students, my grades were exceptional. The old me might have lorded it over others with a smirk, but the current me didn't feel like boasting or demeaning myself. The past 7 years had been so rich for me, filled with so many once-in-a-lifetime experiences. My marriage with Ellen Elise, my research on curses, the bizarre doll in Rudeus's manor, the battle on the demon continent, the demon eye I was given, the birth of Clive. There was just so much that had happened, so many things that I had to face with my whole heart to overcome. It was those challenges that made me the man I was today, not any inborn talent. Remembering that kept me grounded. My experience might have been why I was so well regarded by my congregation when I worked as an apprentice Millis priest. They said that despite my youth, I had extraordinary empathy. Sometimes they even told me I'd grow up to be a fine priest. When the priest in charge of the Sharia church gave me my priest certificate, he also gave me his blessing by saying, "You'll do fine anywhere you go." The priest would never have said that if I were still the same boy I was 7 years ago.
A smile bubbled up from within Cliff. He still hadn't become the man he once dreamed of being. He was better than that man. He preferred this version of himself.
Now, where to go from here? My research report was submitted, and there was now little time left until the graduation ceremony. I had told Rudeus that I'd give an answer by graduation, but I had yet to settle on one. I wanted to return to Militian, but I had a wife and child now. My parents had died in a power struggle within the Millis Church, specifically my grandfather's power struggle as the Millis Pope. Returning to Militian would absolutely put Ellen, Elise, and Clive in danger. And then Rudeus dropped a solution into my lap. He wanted me to assist Orsted as a member of the Millis Church, to forge an alliance. If I could do that, then Rudeus would offer all the help needed for me to rise through the ranks. He'd see to it that Ellen, Elise, and Clive were protected. It was everything I could ask for and more, but past arrogance aside, I don't see myself being worth that kind of support now. Certainly not from someone as amazing as Rudeus. I may have had my doubts about Rudeus when we first met, but he was sincere and a hard worker, and it was no exaggeration to say that most of my once-in-a-lifetime experiences only happened because of Rudeus. Someone that extraordinary asking me for help was probably a show of friendship more than anything else. Still, this was everything I could have wanted. Ellen, Elise, and Clive would be safe. I'd have Orsted's formidable backing, and the road to the top of the Millis Church hierarchy would be wide open. It was everything I wanted. And yet, something about it felt subtly off. I didn't yet understand why that was. What should I do? What did I want? Every day I agonized over it until it was time to go home to Ellen, Elise and stop thinking. I guess I'll hang around for a bit longer.
Cliff had planned to go straight home after submitting the report, but he turned sharply on his heel. If he went home now, then the day would end like all the others did. That wouldn't be good.
St. Millis once said, "If childbirth be the duty of people, then shun it not, but indulge in it not." St. Millis also once said, "Let thyself anguish and do not flee from thy anguish." That meant that it wasn't right to flee from my anguish and indulge in Ellen, Elise. The phrase, "always let thy heart be at ease," was also in the teachings of Millis, so fraying my own nerves over this was no good either. But I had to make a decision soon, a decision on how I would answer Rudeus's request. What do I do? I had said that I'd decide after discussing it with Ellen, Elise, but Ellen, Elise had no comment either way. All she said was to think for myself. She said it not to abandon me, but to give me a gentle push. If that was Ellen, Elise's stance, then I felt obligated to work this out on my own. Ellen, Elise would live a very long time, many times longer than I would. In fact, our child likely would as well. Compared to her experience, I was a baby. Yet Ellen, Elise never treated me like a child. She saw me as her beloved husband. Ellen, Elise respected me, so I wanted to return the favor. I can do this. I am a genius. That phrase slipped out like a habit. It was once something I believed without question. Now, it was a mantra to motivate me to action. I knew full well by now that I was no genius, but it cheered me up to repeat those old words and remembered believing that they were true.
We should.
Cliff faintly heard the echo of arguing voices from down the hall. Fights weren't particularly rare at the University of Magic. At any other time, Cliff would have ignored it, but in this moment Cliff found himself drawn to it and descended the stairs. Among those voices was one Cliff recognized.
That's what I said. We're the ones who should be doing this. Exactly. We can't expect other people to wipe our ass. We've got to protect this school ourselves.
A number of students were shouting while gathered around a petite girl. They weren't threatening her, though. It seemed she was some kind of leader, so the others were pleading with her to make a call, and that girl was someone Cliff knew well.
Please, President. You have to let us go, President Norn.
It was Norn Greyrat. She stood scowling, surrounded by the other students.
Norn, what's wrong? Is there some sort of problem?
All of the students, Norn included, turned to face Cliff. Her expression relaxed a bit, but other students stepped forward before she could respond.
Who do you think you are? This is student council business.
Standing in Cliff's way was a girl about as tall as him and a beast man who might have been twice his height. Cliff recognized the two of them as well. They were current members of the student council.
Hey guys! Could you move, please?
Norn wedged herself between the two and pried them apart so she could wriggle through. It was the kind of motion that Rudeus, if he were here, would have said a dumb pun to himself. For like, wow, Norn's really come between you.
I'm sorry, Cliff. Everyone here's just a bit worked up.
Cliff Grimoire. This kid? The one from the demonic circle of 6?
He's not just a kid. He's someone I owe a great deal to.
Oh, sorry.
The Beastman muttered an apology, but kept his glare. The old Cliff might have responded to that look with hostility or fear. The current Cliff had seen worse. Things that would strike fear into any reasonable heart merely by existing. Compared to Orsted or a Tofei, this Beastman was a puppy.
So, what happened? Could you tell me if it isn't too much trouble?
Well, the truth is, there are rumors that a ghost is haunting the school.
Cliff had heard those rumors as well. Every night, people would hear moaning voices or rattling noises, or they'd see a translucent figure in the hall, so the stories went. In fact, there were even students who'd collapsed, sapped of all their mana, but it was far from uncommon at the University of Magic to see students passed out from excessive practice, and ghosts were a common rumor. Or so Cliff thought.
So, next, well, when we went to investigate, we found a door deep within an unused underground storehouse that had a strong seal placed on it. When we opened it, skeletons came out.
Norn fumbled over her words as she explained to Cliff. It was like she was hiding something. Cliff was sure she was, but he chose to let it go.
Yeah, it sounds like you messed up. If something's heavily sealed, then whoever sealed it probably had a good reason for doing so.
A loud "gah" was heard from among the student council. It came from a feisty-looking girl with pigtails. She was probably the culprit who lifted the seal.
For now, we got a teacher's help to reapply the seal.
Norn's tone suggested that this was where everything went wrong. The door was sealed with St. Tyr barrier magic. A wraith had slipped through that St. Tyr barrier and appeared outside. That meant it was probably a high-level wraith lurking in that underground storehouse. The university contacted the Magicians Guild and requested professionals who could exterminate it. Or, that was the plan, but it had hit a snag. Beginner-tier divine magic was more than enough to take down a typical wraith, but high-level wraiths were different beasts. If it was an A-rank deadly wraith inside that storehouse, they'd at least need advanced-tier divine magic. Unfortunately, there weren't any advanced-tier divine magicians in the Magicians Guild. The university gave up and contacted the Adventurers Guild in the hopes of obtaining an advanced-tier divine magician, but alas, this wasn't Millis. Advanced-tier divine magicians weren't exactly on every street corner here in the Northern Territories. To make it even worse, the Magicians Guild complained about the idea. They'd have to call in a divine magician from a different town's branch. Borrowing a magician from the Adventurers Guild would hurt their reputation, they said. But even if the school could get the divine magician from another town to come, they wouldn't show up right away. And so, the days passed, until the first victim appeared. The cause was uncertain. Maybe the seal hadn't been reapplied correctly, or maybe it'd been faulty since its first application. The victim was an unnamed female student who fell into a coma after the wraith attacked her and drained her of her mana. Her only symptom was simple mana exhaustion, not anything life-threatening. She was back in class the next day, but ever since, the victim count steadily climbed. For the moment, it appeared that the wraith was still warded within the seal and could only escape outside to attack students at a particular time of day. But wraiths would steadily power up with each feast of human mana they consumed. If it continued to attack students, it would soon grow strong enough to break through and bring an army of skeletons with it. The potential fallout could be catastrophic.
That's why some among the student council have suggested that we should go down there and defeat the wraith before that happens.
I can at least use beginner-tier divine magic. I bought some weapons from the workshop district that are strong against wraiths. This is what we've been studying magic for! President, please, give us the word.
Wraiths were by no means impossible to fell by methods besides divine magic. Normal attacks had some small effect, and magical items or implements would inflict damage. In that sense, a divine magician was not strictly necessary to exterminate a wraith.
I see. Well, what do you think?
I'm against it. If this monster were something we could handle on our own, then the Magicians Guild and the teachers surely wouldn't be waiting on some divine magician.
You've got that right.
Divine magic might not have been the only method, but it was far and away the most effective. A seasoned adventurer wouldn't even try to fight a wraith without a divine magician or a lot of preparation. They were that dangerous, and this was a high-level wraith to boot. Underestimating it could easily get them all wiped out. It was there that Norn deflated.
But I can't just stand by and watch more students be harmed.
Norn couldn't totally oppose taking action while students were getting hurt, and caution aside, many of the students making up the student council were the cream of the crop. They were proficient enough to make even Norn consider that they might have a shot. At the same time, she couldn't deny that she had a long way to go compared to people like her brother, which made her waffle on making a decision.
What should we do?
Come now, you could just... No, wait, you have a point. I almost asked why she didn't just consult Rudeus, but I stopped myself. I started to realize what Norn was feeling. Absolutely, Rudeus could solve this problem in a snap if Norn told him about it. He was no master of divine magic, but his skills at offensive magic were imperial tier. If anything, I speculated he was on the cusp of divine tier. Taking out a wraith or two would have been nothing for him, but it just wouldn't have been right. To Norn, it was out of the question. She couldn't explain in words why that was, but given my own dilemma, which I needed to solve myself, I understood. All right, let's try this. If you're all right with it, I'll give you my help.
Huh? That's right. You can use advanced tier divine magic.
Cliff had reached advanced tier divine magic. Divine magic at intermediate tier or above couldn't be taught without permission from the Millis Church, so it wasn't taught at the University of Magic. They didn't even have staff who could teach it, but Cliff was the Pope's grandson. Millis made an exception for him and gave permission for him to learn divine magic. As such, the University of Magic invited a special instructor to give him advanced tier lessons. Cliff was just about to graduate, so that instructor had departed. It was on him.
President, this is a job for the student council. Sir Cliff might be a part of the Circle of Six, but we still shouldn't involve regular students. That's right. We're the ones who should do this. If not, people are going to say the student council is too incompetent to do anything.
The script is adjusted and casted by Artale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening.
Themselves! They'll say that our president is powerless.
The two students who had stood in Cliff's way earlier objected loudly to the idea, but Norn's spine straightened. She glared them down.
That. Stopping the attacks matters more than our pride. And besides, what if something happened to you guys? Any of you could be next. President? President Norn.
Norn turned back to Cliff and looked him in the eyes. Her eyes were steely, nothing like the eyes she had when she first visited Cliff or when Rudeus left for the Beggarid continent. Those had been the eyes of a lost lamb, eyes that trembled in fear and uncertainty. Looking at Cliff now were eyes that had gained determination with each passing year. She'd visited the church where Cliff worked whenever she needed to talk. All those confessions and complaints must have made a difference.
Hey, Cliff, are you up for this?
Yeah. Cliff had heard Rudeus say with glee that Norn had really grown up every now and then, but Cliff hadn't seen it given that he'd only ever heard her complain and do confessions. But now he felt like he was seeing a glimpse of that girl Rudeus was talking about. It also delighted Cliff to hear Norn ask him for help instead of her brother.
All right, Council, we'll be infiltrating the underground storehouse. But if it ever turns into more you can handle, retreat immediately. Are we clear? Yes!
And so, Cliff and the student council ventured down into the underground storehouse. The underground storehouse lay before them. The University of Magic was a distinguished institution with over 2 centuries of history since its founding. I couldn't put number on its age, but I'm certain that Cliff or anyone in the student council could produce it if you asked them. Anyway, the University of Magic's building had gone through plenty of extensions and reconstructions since its founding, building it into the mammoth of a school we now knew. The elegance of the building's layout speaks to the characters of the capable administrators and architects who first laid these buildings' foundations. But no matter how much effort first went into the tidy facades of the buildings, waves of repeated renovations combined with the battering of time left some buildings that a generous eye might glide over while admiring the campus's beauty. One of the buildings was this very storehouse. There were a number of these storehouses arranged on the periphery of the building, and they were all stuffed with the University of Magic's history. Magic wands from 200 years ago, scrolls from 150 years ago, a principal's century-old family toupee. Anything that might have any use at all was tossed in here when no immediate use was obvious. In short, it was a dump. Once Norn took office as student council president, she decided that it was time to take out the trash. If the junk were cleaned out from the storehouses, the school would have more space. So, she suggested a plan to renovate them into student locker rooms. Garbage cleanup in an unused room. It was the kind of practical, albeit inessential, little project that suited Norn. But recently, the student population had grown too large. It became a pressing reality that the school was running out of personal lockers to offer students. There were teachers who weren't on board. They said that everything in those storehouses was an artifact of history, some of them valuable. You couldn't toss everything indiscriminately. But Norn shut those complaints down by saying if they really are valuable, then that's all the more reason why they shouldn't be abandoned in the corner of a storehouse. In the end, the student council appropriated the necessary funds, hired assistants within the school, and began work on clearing out the storehouse. This project was received relatively positively, and many students eagerly joined so they could earn a little cash. But as the work continued, a few of those student workers met the Wraith.
That was how this all began, so we feel some responsibility as the student council.
Well, as far as I've heard, the student council shouldn't have any need to feel like they're at fault.
In retrospect, victims popped up once in a while before cleaning had ever started. Even with the barrier reapplied, the attacks kept increasing in frequency. This was proof that the Wraith in the storehouse was growing more powerful. Even if the student council hadn't taken on this project, the Wraith would have broken free from that barrier sooner or later. If anything, the student council helped everyone discover the Wraith even quicker, so there was a silver lining here.
Oh!
Groaning at Cliff's words was a girl, the same pigtailed one who'd clung to Norn earlier. Both her fists gripped her 50-centimeter wand as she glared at the pitch-black stairwell leading to the underground storehouse. Her teeth were clenched and her body shook. She was the one who'd found the sealed door in the dark. The one to peel away the seal was, also, her. The first time she opened that door, a skeleton had leapt out. Its surprise attack caught and injured one of the other students who'd followed her down. The cleanup job turned into a clash. They'd barely managed to destroy the first skeleton, but immediately it resurrected. The rest of the student council rushed to the sound of the commotion. They'd managed to hold the door back with beginner-tier barrier magic long enough for a teacher with saint-tier barrier magic skills to arrive. But that friend of the girl who'd broken the seal was still badly hurt. If they had been a little less lucky, the collateral damage could have been far worse. She might not have known that a Wraith was behind that seal, but she couldn't deny that she removed it partly on a whim. That would typically be grounds for expulsion. However, Norn had covered for her. She tied the incident to the recent ghost stories and told the lie that they had bumped into the storehouse's door and accidentally disturbed the seal while searching for ghosts. The fact that the skeleton continued to resurrect and attack until divine magic pulverized it to dust proved that there was a Wraith controlling it. There really was a Wraith there, and it really was attacking students, so Norn hadn't fabricated everything. The girl who'd opened the door must have been sick with guilt regardless.
It sure is creepy.
As he followed her lead and peered into the darkness, the sealed door was somewhere in there. The skeleton scare had put a halt to the storehouse cleaning project. The area was declared off-limits by the student council's authority.
Cliff recalled the last time he'd been in this position. It was when he joined Rudeus to search the building that would eventually become his manor. Back then, Cliff was shivering just like the girl who stood beside him now.
Hey, what was your name again?
Huh? Me?
Yes.
It's Sheila, okay?
Sheila glared at Cliff as though to say, "So, what about it?" It reminded Cliff so much of his old self that he couldn't help but laugh.
Sheila, have you ever done things like, that is, have you ever adventured into a forest or a dungeon before?
No, I haven't. But I'm sure a demonic circle of 6 member like you has so much experience. So, who cares?
Oh no, I have almost none. It's just that there's something I once heard from someone who did have that experience. He said that when beginners try to take on too much, they end up unable to handle any of it. Focus on doing one thing and doing it right. Was that from the time when he tagged along with Step Leader on an adventure? No, it had to be from when he searched that manor with Rudeus a few days later. Cliff recalled that Rudeus gave him a single order. If we run into an enemy, use basic level divine magic to attack them. Cliff kept that order in his head, and when the doll did attack, he was able to fend it off with divine magic. Right. Beginners can't handle too much. Is there anyone in here who's used to fighting monsters or has worked as an adventurer?
Of the 7 student council members, 2 hands went up in response. One belonged to the beastman, and the other belonged to a human. Many beast folk grew up in forests, where they'd fight their share of monsters. The human probably had a history as an adventurer.
All right, I'll have you 2 give the orders. For everyone else, let's decide on your roles beforehand.
Hey, Cliff.
What is it?
I wasn't gonna push you too hard on it since the president said she owed you a lot, but you ain't our boss.
Cliff stopped for a few seconds, but he soon realized that anything he said wasn't going to get through to this guy. Fair enough. Then Norn, please take the lead.
Huh? It doesn't matter who's in charge, does it? It's not like I know much about fighting monsters anyway.
But you're the president.
Well, that's true. Okay, I'll talk with Nettle to assign roles.
Following Cliff's suggestion, Norn walked over to the student with the raised hand and discussed everything in detail.
Nettle, you used to be an adventurer, right? I'll tell you everyone's strengths, so I hope you can give me advice on who'd be a good fit for what job.
Cliff looked back at the beastman who'd raised his voice. Of course. This was why he'd follow Norn and not Cliff. Norn was in her element assigning the party's roles. She recalled every detail of who was good at what magic and who had useful non-magic skills as she efficiently assigned the roles. If the old Norn were handed a leadership role, she might have panicked and worried about what to do before hanging her head in resignation. But this time was different. She wasn't exactly perfect, and she still seemed plenty panicky, but she was able to work together with those around her to take care of a responsibility, even one thrust on her as suddenly as this one. She didn't naturally know her ass from her ankle, but she was getting it done.
All right, that should settle it. Are you ready, everyone?
Yes!
With the roles decided, Cliff and the student council members walked deeper into the darkness of the underground storehouse. The door was stone. The magic circle carved into its surface emanated a pale blue glow, a Saint Tier barrier spell. The University of Magic only had one teacher on staff that could use Saint Tier barrier magic. When any of the barrier spells set throughout the school needed adjustments or maintenance, he was the one who did it.
The magic circle doesn't look like it's worn off.
His barrier magic expertise only went up to intermediate tier, but studying curses, developing the Zalif prosthesis, and manufacturing the magic armor had made him quite knowledgeable on magic circles. If nothing else, he could tell at a glance that the magic circle was working properly, and it didn't take much longer to figure out how to temporarily turn it off. If he spent a little more time decoding it, he could probably learn how to use this Saint Tier barrier spell himself. But of course, Cliff was a man of order. He always followed the rules, even if he was capable of breaking them. If Cliff learned this Saint Tier barrier magic, it could land the teacher who maintained this seal in hot water. He had no intentions of doing so.
After all, he realized he could study anything he wanted once he returned home to the holy country of Millis. I can switch it off. We can get in.
Understood. Everyone, are you ready?
The student council members readied their weapons in response. Some took a deep breath. Some had a glimmer in their eyes. There were humans, beast folk, halflings, and demons. Norn's student council certainly had a lot more personality to it than the all-human staff that Ariel had during her tenure. It was probably the first time in the school's history that so many non-humans had been gathered onto a single student council.
All right, open it, please.
At Norn's request, Cliff made a single incision into the magic circle, and suddenly, the magic circle's light faded into nothing. The lanterns held by the student council members were now the only lights left illuminating that stone door. The doorway only opened wide enough for 1 or 2 people to squeeze through at a time. First was Nettle, the former adventurer, who craned and held his lantern in on front of him before sliding a foot inside. The other students followed after. Once they were all inside, the beastman gripped the door once again, and with that same terrible scraping noise, pulled the door partially shut, not all the way. If the door were fully shut, the student council risked having their exit resealed by a teacher who came to check up on them. As a precaution, they left it ajar just wide enough for a single person to slip through. The off-limits sign just outside the underground storehouse's entrance was still up, and they plastered a notice that said, "Under Student Council Investigation. Please refrain from reapplying any seals for the time being on the stone door as well." If Rudeus were in this situation, he'd just wing it and manage to get himself sealed in. But many of the student council members were the kind of nerds who got locked inside places by pranksters or bullies, so they'd learned to take precautions. The underground storehouse fell silent. They strained to listen, and in the dark, the students heard the faint sound of rattling from closer than they'd like.
There were skeletons in here with them.
Lost. All right, let's stick to the plan.
At her command, the beastman and a halfling boy took their places at the front. Both of them held a steel mace in their hands. Skeletons were all bone, so blunt weapons were more effective than edged ones. All of the student council members were equipped with either magic wands, staves, or maces. The plan was to fend off the skeletons with strikes and spells, while the ranged attackers in the rear aimed for the wraith that controlled the skeletons.
President, stand back!
The rattling grew louder as the lantern cast its light onto white shapes. A figure made of bones, only bones, no sinew or muscle to hold them together, nevertheless stood upright. A skeleton, it shuffled towards them. This clean-picked corpse caught a look at the student council members, then lifted the stick it held high over its skull. As it did, the rattling grew into a chorus as numerous others like it shuffled into the light.
No retreat. Everyone, prepare to counterattack.
At Norn's order, the beastman and the halfling swung their maces hard. The skeleton swung its stick, but its movement was sluggish. A skeleton's abilities in death are proportional to what they were in life. The skeleton didn't belong to a warrior. The beastman shattered the skeleton across the ground with a single strike from his mace. However, the bones on the ground rattled as they began to reassemble. The skeletons would continually resurrect until the student council defeated the wraith that controlled them.
Forward!
Following her orders, the student council members beat aside the skeletons as they advanced inwards. Fortunately, none of the skeletons were particularly dexterous, so they couldn't resist the council's charge. Onward they moved to the deepest room. There they found a single altar. Of all the things that could atop an altar, this one had absolutely nothing. Nothing, that is, except the translucent figure above it. A figure without any legs.
Why? Why?
It was the wraith.
Why?
The wraith's tattered robe fluttered as it slowly turned to face the students. What remained of its gaunt, half-rotted face still showed some signs of youth. Surprise flitted across its face for just a moment, but once it comprehended the shapes of Norn and the other students, it unleashed a hair-raising shriek.
It's the wraith!
The wraith's shriek was enough to make a few of the students shrink back, and as they did, the numerous bones strewn around the altar floated up and assembled into more skeletons. Worse, the skeletons destroyed earlier, behind them, resurrected into a fresh attack wave. The student council members were flanked between armies of skeletons in the front and the rear, all according to plan, but...
Ouch!
One of the students suddenly felt a pain in her ankle. When she looked down, she saw a tiny bone, maybe 20 centimeters long. It was a rat. It was a rat's bones. It was a rat's pearly white bones, and it was scurrying around and biting the students in their ankles.
Rah!
In her desperation to get the skeletal rat off of her, the girl screamed and shook her leg, swinging her wand arm as she did. It wasn't the only skeleton rat. Dozens more scuttered across the student council's feet and writhed about their ankles.
Huh? Whoa! Eek!
Their formation fell apart.
Calm down, please. First we'll focus on the human skeletons? No, or maybe we should retreat?
Norn attempted quell the wave of panic, but with no clear idea of what to prioritize, she found herself overwhelmed. She could only swing her mace at the monsters leaping at her feet. While she struggled, the human skeletons closed in on the students. The rest of the party might have been panicking, but Cliff held it together.
The rats are a problem, but the skeletons are slow, and it doesn't look like this wraith is all that tough. If this were an A-rank deadly wraith, it would have buried the party under a hail of magic as soon as it finished summoning the skeleton rats. Or maybe it would have closed in on them to suck out their mana. And yet, it did neither. It just floated above the altar and continued to shriek. Its voice wasn't even that scary. Compared to that boneheaded demon king he'd met on the demon continent, this wraith sounded like a schoolgirl. Wait, what if this wraith is actually weak?
That thought hit him like a bolt. If this were the old Cliff, he might break formation, disobey, and put everyone else in danger. This one wouldn't do that on a hunch. Of course, that only applied when it was a hunch alone. Cliff realized there was something he could do to turn that hunch into a certainty.
Eye of identification.
As he pulled up his eye patch, in an instant, his field of vision was filled with words, and yet more words. He waded through the headache-inducing wave of information until finally he arrived at the information he needed. He saw it. He saw the line of text displayed upon the wraith. This was power of the demon eye. He'd been granted it from the great emperor of the demon world, Kisirika Kishirisu. Cliff hadn't slacked on his training, but he was still nowhere near as adept as Rudeus was when Rudeus used his. He'd need many more years of practice to reach that level. But if nothing else, he'd practiced enough to use it in a crisis.
I'm going in. Someone cover me.
As he leapt out of the crumbling formation, his target was the wraith. Standing in his way were two skeletons. Cliff made a wide swing with his mace toward the skeleton on his right, slamming it right into its hips. The skeleton's pelvis shattered before it crumpled to the ground.
Exercise!
From the back, someone finished their incantation, and a white light blew past Cliff and crashed into the skeleton to his left. The single strike of divine magic turned it into dust on contact. He didn't need to turn around to check. That voice had been Norn's. Cliff ran a few more steps, planted his feet, and began his own incantation.
I call upon thee, God who blesses the land which nurtures us, deliver divine punishment to those foolish enough.
Suddenly, a skeleton jumped out from Cliff's blind spot into the light. It thrust the sharpened edge of its stick straight toward Cliff. He jerked his body in an attempt to dodge it, but it all happened too quickly, and it struck him in the ribs. The searing pain shot up his spine. Cliff gritted his teeth, pulled himself together, and focused on his enemy. The wraith was right there.
To defy the natural ways. Exercise.
A mass of white light shot forth from Cliff's wand. It flew toward the wraith with more than enough speed. Direct hit.
Gag.
The wraith's death throes rang out as it disintegrated, its translucent body tore to pieces, each shred burning like a cinder before snuffing out. A half-second's delay and the skeletons crumpled to the ground, puppets with their strings cut.
Huh? Did we do it?
Unsure of what had happened, the student council members peered around at the scattered bones. Cliff examined his surroundings for more vengeful spirits before grasping his ribs and collapsing to a knee.
God.
Best. Cliff, are you all right?
Norn rushed to him and began the incantation for a healing spell. A faint light washed over Cliff's wound, and suddenly it closed.
Thank you so much. Honestly, I don't even know what...
No, it's not your fault. Nobody expected those skeleton rats. The wraith being low rank was what saved us.
How could you tell that the wraith was low rank?
Because I've got this.
He said, as he tapped the surface of his eye patch. The one line in the sea of text that he found when he used the eye of identification was simple and sweet. Yep, Thassa Wraith. Ain't too tough, neither. Still, Cliff made a gamble when he stepped out of formation. The eye might have said the Wraith wasn't too tough, but a beginner-tier divine spell could have failed to kill it. If Cliff's strength hadn't been enough, or if the eye's idea of not too tough was measured by the standards of the great emperor of the demon world, Cliff could have been killed by the counterattack. Cliff could guess from other cues that it was a low-rank wraith, but there were no guarantees. A gamble.
Well, it worked out. We managed to exterminate it.
that we did. Thank you very much. Still, it's strange. From what we discussed, there should have been a high-rank wraith here that was strong enough to break through a Saint-tier barrier.
Thank goodness there wasn't. If this was what a typical wraith put us through, we might not have made it out alive against a high-rank one.
The student council, previously stunned as they processed the encounter, were rattled sharply awake by those words. But the truth was the truth, so they couldn't deny it. A swarm of skeleton rats was enough to make them fall apart. If the skeletons had been controlled by a high-rank wraith, then they would have moved more swiftly, to say nothing of the barrage the wraith itself would have unleashed. If the situation had been different, the student council could have easily ended up as the newest skeletons down here.
But it really is strange. Maybe we should investigate a bit?
Good idea. All right, everyone, please look through this area. Keep an eye out for other skeletons or wraiths.
With the wraith gone, it was time for the investigation to begin. It turned out the wraith had been escaping with the help of mice. The students found a wide-open mouse hole in the corner that, upon further investigation, led right to the surface. The wraith must have leaked through it to attack those students. As to why there was a wraith here to begin with, a tattered journal found lying in another corner of the room shed some light there. It wasn't a pretty story. This room was apparently used to store one of the University of Magic's most prized magic items, but at some point they moved it somewhere else. With the room now empty, a teacher ordered a few students to clean it, but shortly after they got started, they found themselves locked inside. From the students' perspective, it seemed like a malevolent plan by the teacher to lock them away. But maybe the teacher forgot about the cleaning, locked the door, and just left. The truth of what happened here was lost to time. The students did try to escape, but these were just first years who'd barely gotten their bearings, or perhaps this grunt work fell to students who'd been held back a year. None of their attempts to escape proved successful, and so time passed, and so did they. The weapons the skeletons held all appeared to be the remains of cleaning utensils, and the number of skulls they found perfectly matched the number of students locked in. That settled it. They were as close to knowing what had happened as they were ever going to get. But the student council felt like speculating, and this is what they came up with. Perhaps the teacher returned days after the students had died. This teacher fearfully opened the door and discovered the bodies of those dead students. Fearing responsibility for such a tragedy, they made up some reason to justify sealing it, or at least get someone else to do it. The incident was buried, and at some point the students became undead. Centuries later, mice burrowed deep enough to reach the underground storehouse, which is when the attacks began. That was what student council guessed, at least. So many years had passed since this storehouse was last used that it was likely that the teacher responsible for this and relatives of the students involved were long gone. Cliff gave the students' bones a funeral and proper burial. He figured it was the one thing he could do as a Millis priest. The student council members all attended. They at least wanted to offer a prayer. They dug graves for each student and recited scripture for them. They did all of this in pensive silence.
How will the school handle this incident?
It sounds like they'll go public with it. It happened centuries ago, and they can't find their relatives anyway, so they figure it won't hurt their reputation much.
I see. I thought they'd cover it up.
Head teacher Genius really pushed for announcing it.
Ah, yeah. Mr. Genius is an honest guy.
Cliff knew Genius himself. He considered him a decent, understanding man. In fact, ever since Genius became head teacher, there'd been a huge reduction in racial discrimination against the staff. The fact that he had a strong sense of justice and treated people equally probably played a part.
Ah, right. By the way, Norn, may I ask a question?
Set. What is it?
You may find what I want to ask you rather upsetting.
Wow, if you're saying that, it's gotta be pretty bad. Can you give me a few seconds? I need some mental preparation.
Norn took a deep breath, lightly smacked her cheeks, and said all right to pep herself up. Then she turned to face Cliff.
Hit me.
Why didn't you consult Rudeus about this?
Van.
Well, if you'd asked Rudeus instead of me, I think you could have solved this whole problem without this kind of risk.
Oh, right, that.
I take it you did have your reasons then?
I mean, yes, I'm trying to avoid relying on my brother for every little thing. When it comes down to it, I figure if there's something I can do myself, I should do it. But you're right, I should have just asked my brother for this one. I made the wrong call.
Norn said she'd made the wrong call, but Cliff remembered it differently. Norn was opposed to doing this at all. She knew that they couldn't handle it on their own, so she tried to stop the students from rushing in. If anything, it was Cliff's sudden intrusion into their business that caused her to make the wrong call. If I hadn't shown up, then there's a good chance that she would have asked Rudeus for help. I apologize for the weird question.
Go. Oh, no worries.
Before the two had realized it, the rest of the student council members had gathered around them.
Cliff!
It belonged to that beastman who'd had a problem with Cliff before. The pigtailed girl was next to him, too. The beastman, his intimidating face contorted with emotion, suddenly and sharply bowed.
We would have been in serious danger were it not for your assistance. I ask you to please forgive my rudeness from earlier that day. I'm sorry, too.
Oh, it's no trouble. You weren't that rude after all.
No, I was rude. I judged you because you were a part of the demonic circle of 6. I can't apologize enough. Me too. I kind of figured you were going to be like Linnea or Persena.
That is pretty unfair, yeah.
Said Cliff, pinching his temples at the thought of that sneering cat and dog. If that was what he was being compared to, then their caution was warranted.
Still, I'm glad we solved that problem. Thank you, really.
Now nobody will have to call the president incompetent.
I swear you're always going on about that.
Am I now? But it's the truth that her grades aren't that great, isn't it?
Grades have nothing to do with one's performance on the job, and our president is excellent at hers.
Ugh, of course you beast folk always get like this. Always wagging your tail for your dear whittle president like you're her pet. Bet? Where the hell do you get off?
As the two started to fight, the rest of the student council members came over to get a piece of the drama. Each of them inserted themselves into it in their own ways. Some egged him on, others played peacemaker. Norn watched over them with a smile. They were just playing around. They were all friends here. No need to step in. Cliff suddenly felt curious about where life would take them. The beastman and the human girl. What would they do after they'd finished school?
Apologies out of the way. I have something I'd like to ask you to. May I?
Huh?
What do you plan to do after graduation?
In response,
I want to head back home and work in my village. They're short on mages. They're short on mages.
not all beast folk grew up in the Great Forest. This one hailed from a small farming village in the Northern Territories. He and his family were the only beast folk in the village, which, to be blunt, meant that they'd faced a lot of prejudice. One of his goals was to prove that prejudice was wrong, and he decided the best way to do it was with his own hard work.
My family's actually nobility, but I was thinking of maybe becoming a knight.
Graduation was a long way in the distance for her, so she hadn't given much thought to where she'd go afterward. But even if her goals were a little unfocused, she was trying to find a profession that would make use of her education from the University of Magic. She didn't want to live the soft life of a lady and get married off to some other noble. She wanted to be a knight, where she'd have plenty of chances to use her magic.
I think I'll go into business. A classmate of mine who graduated last year asked me to join his.
He'd be graduating next year, so he was working at a trading company in between his studies to learn the ins and outs. Knowledge of magic proved to be surprisingly handy in that line of work, so there were quite a few graduates aiming to become merchants.
I don't have a single clue myself. I guess I'll just go adventuring.
Of course, there were some students who were far from graduation and thought that way. Many of the older students were groping around for some direction in life, but they were looking. But for the most part, the closer that graduation came to each student, the more focused and serious their plans were for life after school.
Hearing about all of their plans gave Cliff a thought. They're all different, huh? But you all have a lot of respect for Norn, right? Have you considered working for her after graduation?
Well, if President Norn said she wanted me to, then I'd think about it, of course. But she hasn't told us what she wants.
All eyes turned toward Norn.
Huh? You mean me?
That's right, I'd like to hear your future plans as well.
Norn rested her chin in her hand and took a moment to think.
It's still far off, so it's not like I've given it a lot of thought.
Just whatever comes to mind.
Right. Well, I want to find a job that I'll be able to handle around the time I graduate. One that suits me.
Oh, you've got this all figured out then. Her plan was honest, practical, and above all, a little simple. Just like Norn. Don't you have something you want to do?
Last. Wanna do?
Well, in your case, you could ask Rudeus and get whatever job you wanted.
Norn pouted for just a moment, as if Rudeus's shadow was passing over her, and she didn't like it. Cliff realized his mistake, but before he could apologize, Norn gave her response.
I've learned so much at this school, and I want to learn what coming here has made me capable of. That's why whatever decision I make, I'll probably make it just before I graduate. For myself. By myself.
Those words pierced right into Cliff's brain. It all came to him. What he was really worried about. What he really wanted to do. She was right. If he let Rudeus do as he promised, then Cliff would indeed rise through the ranks of the Millis Church. Given that he was also the Pope's grandson, he'd surely be able to reach a fairly high position without breaking a sweat, if not without lifting a finger. And when that time came, Cliff would think to himself, what was the point of those 7 years? What did I study during those 7 years for? What did I work for? What did I have those once-in-a-lifetime experiences for? Did any of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences in those 7 years have any meaning? Yes, I gained a once-in-a-lifetime friend in Rudeus. Wouldn't that mean that not a single thing about me changed during that time? That was it. He wanted to know. He wanted to be sure. He needed to know what he learned and what he gained were worth those 7 years. Norn.
Huh? Oh, what is it?
Thank you. You've taught me a valuable lesson here.
Norn seemed a bit confused by Cliff's sudden, gentle laugh, but she soon responded with laughter of her own. She crossed her hands in front of her, straightened her posture, raised her chin, and said,
No, I have you to thank for teaching me so much over the years.
And with that, she gave her a small bow of her head. Norn had relied on Cliff for help many times when Rudeus wasn't around. It might have seemed like she sat idly by listening to Cliff's words, but Norn was grateful for it. As her senior and a follower of Millis, Cliff had listened to her grumble, taught her how to be strong, guided her in her studies. Cliff wasn't the only person Norn relied on then, but she still considered him a great influence.
It's a bit early, but congratulations on your graduation. Thank you for everything, I mean it.
In response to Norn, the student council members bowed their heads and said, "Congratulations" together. They might have thought of it as following Norn's lead, but true, clear respect rang through their voices.
Well,
Cliff was a bit flustered, but he wouldn't shrug it off. Instead, he broke out into a smile.
Thank you.
That evening, Cliff thought over the afternoon's events while he was in bed. Next to him lay Elenalise, and next to her snoozed Clive. Elenalise's eyes were closed, but she was awake. Cliff could tell because she was continuing to lovingly caress his body. Elenalise didn't answer, but she stopped her hand and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. Cliff understood without her needing to say a word. Cliff turned his head to see her beautiful face right before his eyes. Cliff believed picking a partner based on looks didn't work, but even so, he thought she was beautiful the moment he laid eyes on her. Despite his ideas about what made a good partner, he'd still wanted her. She wasn't the woman he imagined for himself. No, she was more, far beautiful, body and soul and attitude alike.
I decided on the answer I'll give Rudeus.
Elenise wrapped her fingers around Cliff's hand in response, gently.
You see, I'm grateful to Rudeus. Thanks to him, I think I've really grown up. Not enough to feel like I can call myself a man, though.
Elenalise said nothing. When Cliff spoke, especially about serious matters like this, she always stayed silent to lend him an ear, just like this.
I think it's half thanks to him that we've been able to have a child and live this blessed life together. I'm sure he'd say otherwise, of course. He thinks too much of me for some reason. He'd say it was just the result of my hard work. That's been the thing, Lisi. If Rudeus is ever in trouble, I want to help him, whenever, however many times I can. My strength might not match what Rudeus has in his pinky, but I figure there might be something I can do. There must be things he can't do that I can. But if I simply do the same things as him, if I put myself under his protection, then I don't think I'll ever develop another skill that he can't already do. If I want to be there for him as his friend, then I think I need to walk on my own 2 feet, to reach out for what I want with my own 2 hands, to protect what's mine with the strength in my own arms.
The words tumbling out of Cliff's mouth weren't some grand, well-formed philosophy. They were simply what he felt to be true.
I want to feel something real.
Something real. Yes, Cliff wanted to feel something for himself, to feel that he could do it, to feel that he was a real man, to feel how much he'd grown in these 7 years, to feel that he could protect Elise and Clive on his own. He wanted to test himself in the daunting hierarchy of the Millis Church. Of course, this was pure vanity. If he put Elise and Clive's safety first, then accepting Rudeus's help from the start and gaining Orsted's backing would have guaranteed that. But that wouldn't be the end of the story. If Cliff made that choice, he'd surely lose his confidence somewhere down the line. When the time came to face a true crisis, he'd freeze up without Rudeus's help. He'd await the direction of an authority who should instead be his friend and peer, and he'd let some crucial moments slip away.
Cliff couldn't put into succinct words why he thought this would happen. All he had was the vague prediction that he'd turn out that way, and he hated the idea of meeting that fate.
So that's what you think, Cliff? No. But one thing. You already have me within arm's reach. I can be a sword to strike down your foes, or a shield to protect you from harm. No point in not using the weapons you have.
You're right.
They say that weapons and armor are extensions of your body. Elise took that to heart. She wanted Cliff to treat her as though she were a part of his own body. Not in the sense of using her like a tool, but to consider her presence to be as natural as his own arms and legs. This was Elise's way of being there for her husband.
Still, you spent so long thinking about it. What made you decide all of a sudden?
Oh, well, there was this thing that happened with the student council members today.
Cliff talked about the day's events. He explained about Norn's concern, how they exterminated the Wraith under the school, how he asked the student council members about their futures, and last, about how Norn thanked him and curtsied with a smile.
Hey, sounds like you had a good day.
Yeah, but there's one thing that's nagging me.
Oh?
Yeah, it's just a thought that I had today.
Could I ask you to share it with me?
I mean, okay.
Don't worry, I won't laugh.
Elise's voice was gentle as Cliff fumbled over his words. However, the ends of her mouth were curled in a slight smirk. When Cliff started fumbling over words like this, it was usually because he wanted to say something nice about a woman. He didn't want to sound like he was cheating. Elise adored that part of Cliff. He stumbled because he couldn't bear the idea of her ever hating him.
Well, I'm not sure it's something I'm supposed to say to you, but I think, maybe, potentially, Norn might like me.
Oh, heavens. Cliff, you aren't cheating on me, are you? You dog? You cad.
No, I'm no...
Shh. Cliff.
Up to now, this was how it usually went. Cliff would be in a panic to deny it, and then Elise would tease him some more, and in the end, she'd say she was just kidding as they hugged and made up. But tonight, Elise decided to be a bit more serious.
There are a lot of men who would hit on me, but there are many who'd even think of starting a family with me after learning what kind of woman I am. Frankly, I wouldn't either. But you looked through that. You saw this woman you didn't know the first thing about and took her at her word. You tackled the challenge of lifting my curse head on. Those aren't things that just anyone would do. That's why I fell for you. My heart is yours, Cliff. If I had to step outside of our marriage and sleep with someone else to stay alive, then I'd gladly accept death at the hands of my curse. That's how good of a catch you are. There's nobody I'd rather be with.
I don't think I'm that great.
Unsure of how to take such a heavy compliment, Cliff turned beet red as his eyes swirled in their sockets.
Now that I've made myself clear, you're free to believe or not believe the words I'm about to tell you.
Cliff loudly gulped down his own saliva, but Elise cut in without giving him a moment's pause.
She's not into you. My curse has made me quite perceptive to every subtle coil of a woman's heart, so I'm quite certain.
These ruthless words left Cliff speechless, but Elise soon snickered at her husband and continued in a teasing tone.
But maybe, and I do mean maybe, I'm speaking out of jealousy, maybe I'm lying to tear you two apart because I don't want Norn carrying you away.
No, I know that's not true. Right, I knew that. That's why I prefaced my thought with a maybe. It's just that if she really does harbor some feelings for me, then that'd be, a problem.
Sure, dear.
Cliff scrambled for excuses despite his beet-red face. Elenalise looked on with affection. She didn't quite mean to test his loyalty, but the fact that Cliff would get this flustered proved his loyalty. He was so sweet.
Wah! Ah!
And just then, Clive started crying. Maybe Cliff was being too loud, or maybe Clive was sick of his parents flirting, but he was grumpy.
Oh dear, seems we got a bit loud.
Gah, sorry.
Elenalise sat up, leaned over the baby bed beside her, and took care of settling Clive. Cliff sat up as well, his hands uselessly pawing the air in the hopes that he could do something to help. But Elenalise had quieted Clive before he found a way to be useful.
There.
As she gently rocked her body to calm the baby down, Cliff watched as an indescribable joy welled up inside him, and an even greater sense of commitment to the path he'd chosen. Chapter 4: Cliff and Zanoba's Graduation Ceremony. Life seeped past, and before I knew it, it was already time for the Ranoa University of Magic graduation ceremony. The ceremony took place in a large lecture hall. Cliff sat among the rows of the newly minted graduates. Zanoba was actually there too, in one of the back rows. I asked if they could let him join the ceremony even though he dropped out, so they decided to make an exception. He was an exceptional student, after all, and he barely took any classes to begin with. Considered in another light, you could say this was genius's mercy at work. Not that Zanoba himself seemed to care about the graduation ceremony. But hey, it means something to participate in these sorts of functions. Life's rituals matter. The other attendees were the same old people. Seated beside the 500 graduates were the 200 or 300 members of the teaching faculty. Roxy had seemed a bit distant from her colleagues the last time she was in that spot, but this time she fit right in. Perhaps she'd gotten used to it. Her short stature didn't set her apart from the other faculty. If anything, her uniqueness made it clear how she belonged. The only non-graduates present were the student council members. Norn headed the group with a scowl that seemed frozen by nerves. Lined up with her were demons, beastfolk, and more. The student council under Ariel's presidency was very human-centered, but I suppose that when the leader changes, the people working under them do too. I thought this during last year's entrance ceremony too, but Norn seemed to be particularly well-liked by the demon and beastfolk students. I'd never heard a bad word from the rest of the students either. She didn't inspire the same level of fanaticism that Ariel did, but being seen as a reliable student council president was plenty good enough. As her brother, she did me proud. I had gotten Jen Eunice's permission to sit with the student council in one of their empty seats. Graduation ceremonies. I'm a sap for them.
Representing the graduating class, Brooklyn von Elsass, I present you with your degree and your D-rank Magician's Guild certificate.
This year's valedictorian wasn't Cliff. I hadn't heard of the dude they picked instead, but his last name did ring a bell. I recalled that it belonged to a royal family in the Duchy of Neris, one of the magic nations. The Ranoa University of Magic might have carried Ranoa in its name, but its funding came from all three of the magic nations. Putting their nobles and royalty first was probably an unspoken rule.
I, Brooklyn von Elsass, humbly accept.
May you find your way upon the path of magic.
Cliff looked on with melancholy in his eyes. If it were the old Cliff, he'd probably be throwing a fit over not being the valedictorian. Honestly, if you went by grades alone, none of the other graduates would touch Cliff. His final grades were Advanced Tier in the 4 branches of Attack Magic, Advanced Tier Healing, Advanced Tier Detoxification, Intermediate Tier Barriers, Advanced Tier Divine. Plus, he'd done that research report on curse suppression. He didn't quite reach Saint Thierry, but nobody else was even close, maybe not even if you searched back into the school's history. The only person who might be able to compete was Roxy, maybe. Me? All I learned in college was healing and detox, so I wasn't in the running. On top of his excellent grades, Cliff had also become a certified Millis priest. You'd think that spending every morning and night servicing Elenalise would have made him too busy to keep his grades up, but they didn't drop at all. He'd learned everything this school had to offer, and now he was an adult in body and soul. Plus, he nabbed himself a hot wife and they'd popped out a kid, all domestic and stuff. A real normie kinda excellence. So, what about that sad expression? It probably didn't come from grief over how he wasn't valedictorian. It was melancholic, one rooted in deep thought. Maybe he was still considering my proposal from a couple months back, but if he was still thinking it through, that would have been fine by me. There weren't a lot of decisions worth making that could be thought through in just 2 months. With the graduation ceremony now complete, I started by meeting up with Zanoba. He was accompanied by Ginger, who was dressed in formal wear, and Julie, who trotted along behind with a bouquet in hand. Nobody else appeared to be following suit, so maybe it was a Ranoa Kingdom custom.
Congrats on graduating, Zanoba.
Oh, Master, thank you ever so much.
He was wearing his Ranoa University of Magic uniform. Its design was a bit youth-oriented, but it suited him a lot better than Ranoa Kingdom formal wear.
I see that you put in a good word or two regarding my graduation. I must say I was astonished when I received that letter from the university.
Hey, no big deal, right? Showing up to this stuff helps put it behind you. Yeah, it's always a safe bet to attend ceremonies. Sylphie always seemed a little regretful that she didn't go to her own graduation ceremony. Then again, Zanoba might have seen a ceremony as nothing more than a hassle. He was royalty. Or was it just a pain?
Not at all. I thought it was a bother at first, but surprisingly, it wasn't all that bad once my turn came.
Zanoba's voice trailed off as he looked over his surroundings. Graduates were being surrounded by their underclassmen, greeted by teachers, all that good stuff. The kind of sight you get misty-eyed over once some time has passed. Well now, was that group over there centered around Norn, a boy? He looked like a demon, was holding her hand with a beet-red face. Seeing that Norn looked a bit uncomfortable while her fellow student council members were grinning ear to ear, I had a feeling it was the classic love confession. Or perhaps it was more wholesome, where an admirer of the student council president just begged to shake her hand. Norn meet greet. If I bundled Norn handshake tickets with the Rudeus figurines, her die-hard fan club would probably buy tons of them. Wait, I wasn't trying to turn a profit, so maybe I shouldn't... Over in another direction was Roxy, who was surrounded by girls. About 5 schoolgirls were bowing their heads to Roxy with tears welling in their eyes. Roxy gently smiled and told them something. Suddenly, the dams broke, and one of the girls started wailing out of sheer emotion while clinging to her. Roxy seemed uneasy, but she gave the girl some tender pats on the back. The rest of the girls were moved to tears and began bawling as well. There were plenty of other graduation cliches happening around the campus, all with that sappy, tender atmosphere that you could only find at a graduation. Not that anyone was coming near me or Zanoba. I knew I wasn't exactly Mr. Popular here, but it still felt kinda lonely. Well, them's the breaks. I had a reservation at a pub after this. Me, my family, Linnea, and Persena. Maybe I'd call Nanahoshi over too, that way we could all have a little party. Orsted wouldn't be able to join, but I'd already gotten his congrats. I might have felt all alone in this sort of place, but it wasn't like I didn't have my friends. It was time to put this behind me and head on home. Or so I thought.
Mr. Rudeus.
A lone man approached me. He had fluffy blonde hair and looked to be about 20. He seemed vaguely familiar. Who was this guy? Again?
A pleasure to meet you. My name is Brooklyn von Elsass.
Ah, the valedictorian guy. I saw him earlier today, didn't I?
Congratulations on graduating as valedictorian.
Thank you very much, but it was only due to the influence of my family that I was able to take that spot. My test scores have always been second to Cliff's.
Come now, you're too humble. I felt myself about to break out in a cold sweat. I didn't want to say it, but I'd been thinking it.
Still, regardless of my family's circumstances, I proved victorious over Cliff in the end. Anticlimactic as it is.
True, he was the valedictorian. Couldn't argue with results. It probably wasn't the kind of victory you could boast about, though.
Which brings me to you, Mr. Rudeus.
The look in his eyes was resolute. Geez, why? Maybe this was some romantic confession. He had to defeat Cliff before he could ask me out? Is that what's up? But heavens, I belong to another. I have my wife, my other wife, my other wife, and my children to think about.
I wish to challenge you to a duel.
So, I'd been a little wrong. A duel, huh? Ever since word got out about me being Orsted second, I'd been approached by a handful of chumps asking for one, but what did beating Cliff have to do with dueling me? Why?
Right. For a while, I've become interested in ascertaining just how strong I've become. In the past few years, I've become aware that my strength is exceptional by the standards of the average person.
Exceptional? Well, he was the valedictorian. Technically, it made sense he was a cut or two above the average mage.
But you, Mr. Rudeus, have reached far greater heights.
I suppose.
I've long wished to challenge you, ever since the moment I saw you defeat the demon Lord Badigity.
Brooklyn clenched his fists tight as he mentioned that moment.
I come from a family of warriors. When I return to my home country, I'll succeed the family, hire subordinates, and be in a position of commanding others. Once there, I'll surely lose all remaining chances to test my strength.
Yeah, you can't act on a whim once you've got a position to maintain.
Exactly. That's why I'd like to take this final chance to challenge you.
Brooklyn bowed his head with force. I understood perfectly. Every man gets curious about how strong they really are. He knew he was above average. He knew there were people above him. He knew he had a slim chance at victory, but he wanted to challenge me anyway. I understood where he was coming from, except for one part. Where did the defeating Cliff part come from?
Huh? I heard that nobody could challenge you without defeating the demonic circle of 6 first. Miss Linnea, Miss Persena, and Miss Fitz have already graduated. Mr. Body has left, and I've already defeated Mr. Zanoba.
The demonic circle of 6? That was a thing, wasn't it? Beats me as to who started it, though. Defeating all of them to challenge me? Talk about a stickler for rules. So, you won against Zanoba?
Yes. I've bested him numerous times during mock battles as part of our classes.
You don't say. I glanced over to Zanoba. He looked away. Well, in a battle using magic alone, Zanoba probably would lose. But this guy couldn't win against Cliff this whole time, which is what drew this whole thing out until now. He knew he hadn't really bested Cliff, but graduating without challenging me would mean letting his last chance slip away. So he came now to ask anyway. I get it. A graduation memory, huh?
I suppose I really must defeat the ones who've graduated as well?
He probably wanted to make a memory here more than he wanted to win, to put this behind him, like asking out a crush who's way out of your league. Nah, it's fine. Let's do it. No matter what the world, people want to make their graduation special.
I thank you very much.
Brooklyn responded with another aggressive bow. Hey, Zanoba, could I ask you to judge?
Understood, Master.
I handed my coat to Zanoba. The thought of using the magic armor flashed across my mind, but I figured that was best left on the sidelines. The whole thing took about 4 hours. No need to keep you in suspense. I won. I didn't spend those daily training sessions with Sword King Eris and Dragon God Orsted twiddling my thumbs. Our duel wasn't remotely close. I knocked him down. I figured Brooklyn wouldn't want me going easy on him, given the relieved smile he later thanked me with. It seemed like he also knew how this was going to end. That part was fine. After that, a number of other graduates who'd been watching from the sidelines started coming one after another, each challenging me to test their strength. They claimed they'd beaten Zanoba in an eating contest, or beaten Cliff in a race, or any other excuse I couldn't fact-check. The onlookers gathered in droves, and suddenly, I was the center of a crowd. I was starting to enjoy myself. Bring it on. Hey, it was graduation, and I wasn't the one who made up that circle of 6 stuff anyway. Even Norn restrained her usual nagging and spent her energy directing the student council members to manage the queue. She resigned herself to the task of preventing chaos without stifling the normal rowdiness of kids at graduation. Sorry, President. Phew. And so, my duels with about 20 other people had ended. All my training might have toughened me up, but even I was a little wiped out. Everyone seemed satisfied. Every face had this slight look of contentment on it. I hoped I'd helped make memories for the kids headed back to their homelands. Eventually, the crowd cleared. Norn had to clean up the assembly hall, so she told me to head home without her before she vanished. The only ones left were Zanoba and his attendants.
You certainly are popular, Master.
Zanoba seemed exhausted from all that judging. He was a real glass cannon, no stamina.
I must say I'm simply enervated. And you, Master, are you not a tad tired?
Nah, I'm fine. I think we got a bit dirty, though. We ought to get changed before the party later.
A fair point,
He said as he looked down at his clothes. They were covered in dirt and sand that the shock waves from those magic spells had splattered him with. Of course, that went double for me, the one those spells were aimed at.
Then let us return to our homes for now. What of your sister?
Norn said she'd join us, and she already told the people at the hall about it, so she should show up on her own.
I see. Well then.
For a moment, Zanoba's gaze flitted to something behind me, just a little above my ear. I turned around to search for what he was looking at. Found it. A head of short, dark brown hair was looking down at us from the rooftop. Standing next to him was a head of blonde ringlets rustling in the wind.
Julie, Ginger.
Yes?
Apologies, but could I ask you to return home ahead of me and prepare a change of clothes for when I arrive?
Understood.
The two nodded and left. I thought they'd decided Ginger wasn't a servant anymore, but she was acting pretty subservient to my eye. Guess old habits die hard.
Now then, Master, let us go.
Sure. I nodded at Zanoba and we entered the school building.
I saw it all, Rudeus. You cleaned up.
Cliff commended me with a tired expression when we arrived on the roof. Ellenelise was to his side, standing off a ways. I was aware that she had come to the graduation ceremony. She dropped off Clive at our house beforehand, after all. I wasn't aware that she'd come in her schoolgirl uniform, what with her dropping out and all. I refrained from asking what she wore that uniform for, however. Hey, today was a graduation ceremony. Whatever floats their boats, so to speak. You mean how I showed them why they call me the right hand of the dragon god?
Don't be ridiculous. You could have easily done that before you ever fought Orsted.
Fair enough. Cliff rested against the rooftop's railing. So, Cliff, what are you doing up here?
No reason. Just felt like going somewhere high.
Just felt like it, huh? Hey, we've all got times like that. I wasn't great with heights, so my melancholy usually brought me to Paul's grave. Well, congrats on graduating, Cliff.
Thank you.
I walked up to his side and rested my own body against the railing. Zanoba joined on Cliff's opposite side. Elise stood a bit further away, watching over the three of us. Man, we were totally nailing that Yaya protagonist, gazing out into our future's aesthetic. Come to think of it, Cliff had his whole future ahead of him, 22, married with a kid and fresh out of university, and with that new chapter in life, new challenges were sure to emerge. Wait, no, I was being silly. Time to get serious. Focus on what really mattered at a time like this. We needed to talk about the after party. He'd said he was coming before, and it'd be a bummer if one of the stars of the show flaked out. Cliff, what do you do after this? You know, what time would he get there? Would he come with us right to the party, or would he need to go pregame with Ellenelise beforehand? That was what I meant with that question. Cliff responded with silence. Was he getting shy? Did he and Ellenelise still have some schoolgirl role play to get down to?
I did some thinking. I talked it over with Ellenelise, too.
Cliff paused for a few seconds before his next words.
One more year. Can you wait for me?
For a moment, I didn't know how to process what I'd just heard. Our reservation at the pub was today. They'd make us reschedule for sure.
Until your child grows just a bit older, you mean?
Oh, right. Reality. Cliff had said 2 months ago that he'd give an answer at the graduation ceremony. Hey, I hadn't forgotten or anything. We just had the graduation and the after party today, so I didn't want to press him until after that.
Yes, Clive is still so little. I'd like to at least watch over him until he's done weaning.
Cliff looked stern as he gazed down upon the magic city of Sharia. The city stretched out under us. I couldn't tell if it was because of the green roof, but man, my house sure stood out like a sore thumb. Come to think of it, this rooftop wasn't here when we first enrolled. 3 years ago, before the last renovation, they sent out a survey asking what the building needed. I asked for a rooftop, but this was the first time I realized it had actually been built.
It will take nearly 2 years to travel to the holy country of Millis from here. However, Rudeus, if I use the teleportation circle in your home, I could shorten that time. I don't know by how much, but I should have at least a year of leeway.
Cliff seemed to think it was his duty to return home within 2 years of graduating. Always keeps his word, huh?
You'll let me use the magic circle, won't you?
Of course.
I appreciate it.
The teleportation circle was taboo. Using it not for an emergency, but for personal convenience, was surely something that weighed heavily with buttoned-up Cliff.
Also, Rudeus, about joining you.
Yeah? Cliff hesitated to say it. It sounded like I was about to be rejected. I at least wanted to hear his reasoning so I could persuade him one last time.
I'd like you to wait for that as well.
Oh, wait?
Yes. It is true that having the backing of the dragon god Orsted would allow me to reach a high position within the Millis Church.
That was for sure. Orsted knew a lot about the internal workings of the Millis Church. If nothing else, he probably learned about what weaknesses of which officials mattered during his many long loops.
But I feel it just wouldn't be right. Part of me wants to know how far within the Millis Church the efforts I've made can take me, but I also don't want to sit in a seat that someone else handed me.
Cliff clenched his fists as he spoke. I guess I understood. He was just like the guys who challenged me to those duels. He wanted to test his strength. It was the part of Cliff that made him a man.
If those efforts bring me to the top of the Millis Church, then I will become your ally.
I certainly would have liked it if Cliff could do it on his own, but there was always the chance that he couldn't. If it ended with him losing his position, then I could live with it. I'd find another avenue to reach the Millis Church while I hired Cliff to be Orsted's personal helmet designer or something. But that wasn't the only way it could go. The thought of his life ending in an assassination made me sick. He could die. But if it was the path Cliff chose, I wouldn't talk him out of it.
Incidentally, Sir Cliff, do you plan to travel alone 1 year from now, or with your family?
That was right. What did he plan to do about Elise and Clive? Cliff looked pained, a mixture of anguish and shame flooding his face. At the same time, he was resolute.
I'll leave them.
For how long?
Until I'm a real man, at least.
A real man, huh? Which was to say, he didn't know how long it would be. I looked at Elise. Her eyes were closed and arms folded in front of her stomach. She had no illusions. But was this okay? Elise surely wanted to be by Cliff's side if she could, to watch over him and give him the support he needed. The curse mattered too. Cliff's magical implement could lighten the curse's symptoms, but it wouldn't do so for years on end. But it wasn't my place to interject here. Cliff had made this decision with his wife. Cliff was at a crossroads, and he'd decided. I understand. Respecting Cliff's wishes came with its risks. If Cliff died somewhere outside of my control, then I'd lose my only connection with the holy country of Millis. I'd also lose someone who could research curses. As a risk, though, it could pay dividends. Cliff would get more chances to grow if he struck out for himself. That growth would make Cliff a formidable ally when the time finally came. I couldn't say if it outweighed the risks, but it was certainly possible. As a logical move, it wasn't bad. Cliff made his decision, and Elise agreed. I had to respect that. Well then, I'll see you again 1 year from now.
Yes, as will I.
Cliff held out his hand. I grabbed it and nodded deeply. That said, if I had to wait until Cliff became a real man, that was 3 years of not knowing if Cliff would join up. That meant I had to put Cliff to the side and focus on something else. As for what? Well, saying hi to Ariel would be a good start. Zanoba just started with the figurine sales, and I had to make sure the mercenary band kept recruiting. To accomplish both of those, I wanted to expand into the Asura Kingdom. Perhaps I'd use this year to plan how to conquer Asura. I was going to be busy. But first, it was time to party. All right, Cliff, enough of the heavy talk. Let's spend the rest of the night having the time of our lives.
Yeah, let's do it.
And that was Zanoba and Cliff's graduation. Interlude, a country bumpkin visits the city.
Nina, a letter.
It was summer when a letter arrived at Sword King Nina Fellion's doorstep. The Sword Sanctum was always chilled by the year-round snow, but this day was as warm as early spring. The training hall's master, Sword God Gal Fellion, quit before noon. He said, "You gotta be an idiot to train on a day this nice, so you all can do whatever you feel like for today," and then marched gallantly to a napping spot. Nina was a teacher's pet, so her idea of whatever you feel like was continuing her practice, but she paused when she heard of this letter.
A letter? I saw,
Nina, drenched in sweat as she accepted the letter from the mail carrier, broke out into a grin. On the other side of the envelope that bore the emblem of the water god style was sketched a familiar name, Isolde Cluel, the leading swordsman of the water god style whom Nina had trained with just a few years before. Nina recalled that she was now in the Asura Kingdom working as a sword-fighting instructor while also managing a water god style training ground. Their relationship was friendly, but they'd grown distant since Isolde left the sword sanctum. Her letter was a pleasant surprise. More than just pleasant. Nina giddily tore open the envelope before whipping out the sheet of paper within. However, the sparkles in her eyes dimmed the moment she laid eyes upon the tightly packed bundles of words that the paper contained.
What's it say?
Nina, couldn't read. She could piece together an acquaintance's name, but she hadn't reached the level of comprehending entire passages. It never really came up here in the Sword Sanctum. I'll get someone else to read it, she thought. There were at least some people living in this training hall who'd grown up with proper schooling. Someone could read it, probably. Nina headed to the backyard. There, a few of the apprentices were taking in the sunshine as they cheerfully chatted away. It was typically Nina's job to scold them when they looked like they were slacking off, so the apprentices hurriedly stood up straight and got their excuses in order. However, today was the rare day where the master told them explicitly to take the day off, so Nina said nothing about their behavior, and instead asked if anyone could read her letter. The apprentices traded glances before one raised his hand. Nina handed the letter to the one who claimed that he could sorta read human language and asked him to do so. The contents of the letter were quite simple. It summed up what happened in the past few years, as well as what had been happening lately. Rita's death, the struggles of managing the training ground, Isolde's intense quarrels with Ghislaine as a sword instructor. Nina smiled at that detail. She could imagine the orderly, straight-laced Isolde fuming at one of Ghislaine's wild remarks. But that smile turned serious when they reached the final message. Her Majesty Ariel's coronation will be held soon. The entire month is a grand nationwide festival. I'd love for you to come visit for the occasion. The moment Nina heard those words, she resolved to travel to the Asura Kingdom. There was no debate. The sword god style preached that the first to make a move would be the victor for a reason. The moment she wanted to go was the moment she up and went. The main street of Ars, capital of the Asura Kingdom, was absolutely flooded with people, so much so that the slightest wobble to either side of you would force you to bump shoulders, so much so that you couldn't see more than a few meters ahead. Denser than a family of overgrown snow wolves. A packed pack. The capital of the Asura Kingdom attracted people from around the world as it prepared for the upcoming coronation. Countryside folk who came in the hopes of catching even a glimpse of the ruler of the strongest nation in the world. Nobles dispatched from foreign lands who came to give their blessings in the name of diplomacy. Wandering swordsmen who figured that this would be the perfect time to find some work in the palace. Adventurers who predicted that the guild would be short on hands and came to land some simple high-paying jobs. Outlaws who were on the run and bet that the best place to hide a tree was in a forest. Merchants who came to hawk shady wares to make a killing off a huge and festive crowd. Every single race that lived on the central continent, and some that lived beyond it, packed into this nation. And on top of all that, the White Knights of the Asura Kingdom were going to be holding a parade today, so even the town's own citizens were hitting the main street to see their beloved knights in their full glory.
What?
And in the middle of it all, Nina was turning her this way and that as she attempted to walk toward the center of the city. It was the first time in her life that she'd seen so many people. She had been to towns that she'd thought were pretty big, but seeing a crowd of people so massive that it dwarfed her imagination left her dumbstruck.
Tch, watch where you're going, you little sow.
What? Oh, huh?
By the time she processed that someone was pissed at her, they'd been swallowed up by the sea of people. This was new to Nina. She was, for the record, a sword king. With her sharpened senses, she could identify the guy who cursed her out and track him if she wanted, but he'd simply cussed her out and kept walking. He probably didn't even bother to look her in the eye. Maybe that kind of rudeness is like a greeting in the city, she thought. If this were the sword sanctum, she would have sent anyone who talked to her that way right to a healing mage. But perhaps in the capital, being cursed at didn't necessarily mean they were picking a fight.
Hey there now, pretty lady. Would you like to have a look?
Pretty? Who? Me?
After a few more unsteady steps, Nina found the person calling to her was a merchant. He was hawking something in a small shop nearby.
Oh, but of course. Never before have I seen someone as beautiful as you. By the by, ma'am, you seem new to the capital, no?
Oh,
Yes. However, did you know?
Huh? Oh, you're not a local. Getting flustered by a crowd like this is the truest sign of an out-of-towner.
Hearing that she'd been bumbling along like a country bumpkin made Nina's face turn beet red. She thought she'd play it cool in the big city, but to real city folk, her idea of a big city was still the sticks.
It sure is a huge crowd. I guess everyone's here for the coronation?
That's part of it, of course, but today is also the Knight's Parade, so everyone's gathering on the main street.
I see.
You saw all the signs, right? They said that anyone who wants to see the parade should go to the main street, while those who don't should take the back road. Sultan Street?
Sorry, but I can't realize where it is.
Ah, I see, I see. Indeed, if you have no need to see the parade, then perhaps you could come by our store. It's quite easy to enter Sultan Street from its back door.
Are you sure? But I can't pay the to dialogue.
Oh, I wouldn't dream of charging. Ha, that's right. If you say you can't read, then I suggest you purchase one of our products. It's a picture book bundled with a figurine, but the end of the book teaches you how to read it. Rave reviews! Rave reviews!
I can't really afford a bog.
Oh, worry not. Absolutely no worries. Our books are far, far less expensive than what you'd find elsewhere. A mere 2 Assyrian large coppers? Nay, I feel this must be some sort of fate. So I'll lower it to a single Assyrian large copper and 8 small copper coins. What say you?
Before Nina knew it, she was standing on a road that had cleared out considerably while holding a picture book and a figurine. Her wallet was now lighter by the exact weight of a single Assyrian large copper coin and 8 small copper coins. She'd been bowled over by the salesman's rapid patter. Nina was left with the sense she'd been press-ganged into something by the time she realized what had happened, but it wasn't entirely a negative feeling. The speed of the merchant's strikes reminded her of her training with sword god Galphalion. Still, 1 large copper coin and 8 copper coins. It might have been cheap by the standards of the book market, but it was quite expensive by the standards of Nina's wallet. However, that merchant had shown her the way, so not paying her debt to him would have tarnished her name as Sword King. This was for the best, Nina thought, and so she began walking. Sultan Street was cut 2 meters deeper into the ground than the main street. It was a bit damp and abutted plenty of tunnels. It felt like a shortcut for townies instead of tourists. The road itself was wide, and just like the merchant said, it was emptier than the main street. This was only relative, however, as the street was still jam-packed with people. But here, the flow of people was neatly split between those headed toward the center of the city and those headed toward the city limits, so Nina could make her way without getting jostled too much.
I bet I can make it to Isolde's training hall by nightfall now.
The money she'd paid earlier was shaping up to be worth it. With that in mind, she took another look at the doll and picture book in her hands. The figurine was a demon that held a spear, while the cover of the picture book had the same character drawn on it. Our hero, probably. And, unusually, he was of the Super Day race. Nina didn't know what kind of story the book told, but as a warrior, she had always wanted to do battle with a Super Day. According to her friend Eris, the Super Deed were incredibly strong. If Eris, the mad dog who radiated a menace that could scare a devil, spoke of the Super Deed with respect, then Nina was intrigued. Also, if it'll teach me to read like that merchant said, it wouldn't hurt to give it a study in between practice sessions, she thought. This script is adjusted and casted by Artile Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening.
Thought while continuing to walk. Her attention shifted when she heard loud cheers from the main street. It seemed that the parade was starting. Seeing such excitement made her wonder about this parade. She had meant to visit Isolde first, but it wouldn't hurt to swing by the main street now to watch, would it? Huh? But then she saw a glimpse out of the corner of her eye of a red-headed woman who looked just a bit familiar. Eris? Why would she be here? Nina thought as she followed that woman with her eyes. Sure enough, it was her. On the main street, 2 meters above her, popped out the tip of a red-haired head. Nina could only see from behind, but that posture made her certain. No doubt it was Eris. Nina didn't know what she was doing here, but she couldn't resist the nostalgia welling in her heart. Tad. Nina attempted to call out until something made her swallow her words.
Up you go, Lucy. Can you see?
Yup, it's all sparkly.
Come on, Eris. I wanted to give her a shoulder ride.
No way. I know you just want to slobber all over Lucy's thighs just like you did to me last night.
Rude! I wouldn't dream of doing something like that to my own flesh and blood daughter.
Oh, sure you wouldn't.
I mean, it's true that I love her enough to want to slobber all over them.
This conversation was with the man standing next to Eris. She'd seen the man before, too. It was back during that awful encounter with the Demon King, Batagati. He was the magician who defeated him in a single blow. He was the man who'd lately been known as the right hand of the dragon god, with sightings of him being reported in locations around the world. Rudeus Greyrat. Nina realized she was processing a major shock. She knew that Eris had gone back to Rudeus to help him battle against the dragon god Orsted. And since the letters stopped coming after that, she was certain that the two of them had been killed, but she'd also heard scattered rumors that they had appeared together in the Asura Kingdom. Rudeus became known as the right hand of the dragon god after that, so Nina assumed that Eris had surrendered to the dragon god as well. She was sure that Eris had grown strong, far stronger than before. But the Eris that Nina was looking at now was far removed from the one she'd imagined. This Eris was joking and laughing with a man, and the girl she now had on her shoulders was likely her daughter. It never once occurred to Nina that Eris could have gotten married, much less mothered a child. The Eris she knew, that untamed beast, that mad dog, was now doing this. Coming to watch a parade and flirting with a clearly beloved husband. I'll just go see Isolde. With that thought, Nina looked away. Nina had thought that becoming Sword King meant that she was finally on equal footing with Eris, but she was now left to bear this massive sense of defeat.
Nina didn't see it, but this is important. Just out of Nina's sight, obscured by the crowd, Roxy and Sylphie were standing next to Rudeus, with Zanoba and Julie close by. Afterward, Nina headed to Isolde's training hall. The solemn atmosphere and stench of sweat calmed her nerves. After greeting Isolde, Nina was introduced to the students. Every single one of them, boy and girl alike, carried the honest, humble air that only comes from never getting laid.
Yes, this is how a true practitioner of the blade should be, Nina assured herself.
After receiving a tour of the training hall, Nina was brought over to Isolde's house. They'd made arrangements for Nina to stay overnight there during her stay in Ars, since the house that Isolde lived in had a spare room. The room was previously occupied by the water god Rita, but it was fully cleaned out by now.
Nina was unconcerned about Rita and instead found relief in the fact that Isolde showed zero signs of having a man. She was the water emperor, a sword instructor, and a knight. She would have been a real catch. If even Eris could be married with children, then the radiant Isolde could have easily scored a partner. It would have been no surprise for Nina to enter Isolde's home and be introduced to her husband and child. She'd prepared for the worst, and now she felt a proportional sense of relief.
Nina, there's actually going to be a small get-together once the parade ends. I'm sure you must be tired from your long trip, but would you mind joining us there? There are many people who'd love to meet the Sword King.
Isolde proposed this idea while Nina was setting down her luggage and catching her breath.
Sure, fine by me. She didn't know what this small get-together was supposed to be, but it wasn't like she had any plans for the evening anyway. She could put off her sightseeing until tomorrow. Or, so she thought. Nina began to regret her decision within the hour. Of course, her train of thought made several stops before it arrived, finally, at regret. It started with, "Something's off." This was when she saw that Isolde had brought her to a giant mansion near the royal castle. Huh? This looks pretty big for a small get-together, she thought. I've been had, went her next thought. This was when she was brought to a fancy-looking room, made to choose a fancy-looking dress, and was half-shoved into it by several maids. I shouldn't have come, went the thought that brings us to the present. Why had she agreed so instantly? Why had she tagged along so naively? Why had she allowed them to dress her up without putting up a fight? Nina would normally have fought her way to freedom, so why hadn't she? It must have been that she wasn't her normal self. She was wrapped in an unfamiliar dress, made to wear precarious high heels that put her off balance, and even stripped of the sword that had been such a reliable companion to her belt. This was the state Nina was in when Isolde dragged her to the party ballroom and introduced her to person after person. But she soon realized something that gave her a scrap of relief. Not everyone here was a noble. While many of them were, some came from worlds that Nina understood, such as the humble-born knight or the young hotshot mage pulled from another country. And among that crowd were people who, just like Nina, had been tricked into coming and now flopped around, fishes out of water. People feel at ease when they realize they're not alone. As she relaxed, Nina remembered that she was a sword king. It was nothing for her to analyze her opponent and measure her odds of victory. Once she confirmed that everyone surrounding her was a weakling, she even started to feel a bit bold. I'm hungry, thought the newly emboldened Nina. She had an appetite. It occurred to her that she hadn't eaten a thing since noon. All practitioners of the sword god style were heavy eaters. Outside of times where her training required her to hole up in the woods or something, she didn't skip meals. And so of course her eyes were drawn to the smorgasbord of succulent cuisine laid out in the ballroom. And naturally, after attacking every delectable morsel in sight while her fellow partygoers stared, she found herself needing to retreat to the nearest bathroom, and the maid helpfully guiding Nina to the bathroom. Nina struggling to put her dress back on after finishing her business, the maid being long gone by the time Nina finally got it on. Nina finding herself lost in this maze of a mansion with no idea of how to reach the ballroom. All of this was, of course, inevitable. This is really messing me up, she thought. Nina sighed to herself as she trudged down the dimly lit hallway. She'd been continuously overwhelmed by the atmosphere of every place she'd been to since arriving in the Asura Kingdom, and it kept her off balance, a bit disassociated. Her belief she could take on the world now that she was Sword King was in shambles. I used to do things without needing to think so much. Maybe it was because she was now a Sword King with disciples. Or maybe it was because she'd run into Eris and her personality rubbed off on her. Unlike the old days, she couldn't act without thinking about the consequences anymore. She believed that this change had made her a better warrior, but... Oh right, I forgot to tell Isolde about Eris. Eris was in the city, so Nina wanted to suggest another training session with the three of them, but the moment she considered it, the image of what she saw that afternoon flashed across her mind. She shook her head to put it out of mind. That isn't the Eris I knew anymore, she thought. She wanted to forget it, to get back to the ballroom as soon as possible, to give some flimsy excuse and head home. This mansion might have been uncomfortable, but there were plenty of other famous sights to see in the Asura Kingdom. She could have Isolde show her around. No, her friend was sure to be busy, so she'd have to explore on her own. The town had some kind of festival going on, so she could surely find a way to amuse herself. Perhaps she could visit the town's sword god-style training hall. Okay, fine, Just after stealing her resolve, Nina happened to see a room with light leaking out from it. The door was small, certainly not one that led to the ballroom. Still, there was likely someone in there who knew the way to it, so Nina figured she could ask for directions. Feeling half relieved, she approached the door and...
Your Majesty Ariel, surely you don't want that being made public, now do you?
That was a clear threat. She stopped in her tracks. Your Majesty Ariel, she realized. Even a country bumpkin like Nina knew that there was only one person in this country who would be addressed that way.
Ariel Anemoi Asura, the queen whose meteoric return to royalty, after spending nearly a decade in the distant Ranoa Kingdom, captivated the hearts of her people. It would be putting it lightly to suggest that the festivities and fanfare throughout the capital of Ars were all dedicated to this single woman.
Oh, whatever could you possibly mean?
Are you saying you don't remember?
Nina treaded lightly as she approached the door. Once there, she peeked into the room through the open crack. Oh, inside was a man and a woman, a blonde woman sitting in a chair, and a light brown-haired man standing to her side. The man had a face that looked familiar to Nina.
Oh, please. That could be anything.
Oh no, in fact...
Rudeus Greyrat. Gone was the man who'd laughed with Eris just that afternoon. He drew his devilish smile closer to Ariel's cheek. A thought struck Nina. He's pressuring her into carnal relations. Rudeus Greyrat was a man known for having 2 other wives in addition to Eris. Nina remembered rumors about him being rather amorous as well. Word on the street was that he'd also done a lot of work behind the scenes to help Ariel become ruler. If he really was under Orsted's command, then he'd likely assisted Ariel as Orsted's pawn, and now he was blackmailing her into sleeping with him.
I'll kill him, Nina decided in an instant. No need to think.
She didn't know what secret Ariel was being blackmailed with. She didn't know how strong Rudeus was. Isolde was under Ariel's command. If the boss of a friend was being blackmailed, then there was no reason to stay her blade. She didn't even have her sword. But none of that mattered. Nina would find a way to cut him down. This would be the point where Nina, if she'd felt like herself, would tell herself to wait a moment. But the last few hours had taxed her past any capacity for self-control.
But before she could act, Nina's senses altered her to an aura of animosity just behind her. She reeled around. There, a monster in a blood-red dress stood before her.
Eris? Nina hadn't thought she'd be here, but Eris was always by Rudeus's side. Since Rudeus was right here, of course she'd come as well.
Nina?
Eris's expression slacked for a moment to one of suspicion, but her fury soon returned.
Want to tell me who you're aiming all that bloodlust at?
Crap, Nina thought. There was no stopping Eris when she got like this. If they clashed, then Rudeus would come running from that room. She was risking a 2-on-1 fight. Eris might not have had a sword, but being pincered with a mage on the other end was going to be...
Huh? Back already, Eris?
By the time that Nina had thought up the worst-case scenario, it had already come to pass. The door behind her opened, and out popped Rudeus's face. Nina instantly understood that victory was off the table, but facing the impossible with the tenacity of a wild beast was the core of Sword God style. Nina began to concentrate her strength into her core.
Now then, Sir Rudeus, I believe it's about time we joined the party. We're keeping our guests waiting.
When Ariel appeared next to Rudeus, as nonchalant as could be, all of Nina's strength unraveled. Ariel's expression didn't belie a hint of desperation or intimidation. Something was wrong here. Again, that was a feeling she'd grown quite familiar with over the past few hours.
You're not being blackmailed?
She asked as she folded in on herself.
Means...
Ariel looked at Nina's stance and simply tilted her head. Nina and Ariel had never made one another's acquaintance, but after comparing Nina's posture and expression to Eris's and reflecting a bit on the conversation she'd just had, Ariel pieced together what was going on.
Oh no, I was the one who made a request to Rudeus, which he refused. I nevertheless wanted his assistance, and so presented what I thought would be a weakness of his, but he outmaneuvered me. Could it be that you only listened to the latter half of that exchange? Presumed that I was being threatened and were coming to my rescue?
Nina nodded weakly with her eyes still widened. Ariel lightly held Nina's arm and helped her up with care.
Thank you very much. I don't believe we've met. My name is Ariel Anemoi Asura, the incoming ruler of the Asura Kingdom.
Huh?
Here was the future leader of a kingdom in all her glory, and she still felt it necessary to exchange introductions. Unable to process this series of events, Nina panicked and turned to Eris. She eyed Nina with suspicion, but she sighed and threw her a bone.
This here's Nina.
An acquaintance of yours, Lady Eris?
Yeah, she's the Sword Saint Nina Thalion. We trained together back in the Sword Sanctum.
Nina realized she needed to head off the next part of the conversation, where Eris would inevitably say she had no idea what her former training partner was doing here.
I'm a Sword King now, the same as you.
Oh, you are? Congrats.
Nina fell silent after that faint praise. She looked like she'd just boasted about her title for no reason. All she'd wanted was to give a little context.
I see, Lady Nina. Rest assured, tonight's party was planned by Rudeus and me. I believe we'll have a chance to talk later, but for now, please relax and enjoy the evening.
Oh, right.
Ariel smiled warmly and walked down the hall with Rudeus. After seeing them off, Nina let out a massive sigh. This day kept throwing her off.
So, what are you doing here anyway?
Demanded Eris, who had stayed behind with her. Nina turned to face her old friend. Her crimson dress and her updo suited her. Her choice of necklace, earrings, and other pieces of jewelry were muted and tasteful, the subtle hallmarks of a real lady.
Eris, your dress, looks nice.
Course it does. Rudeus picked it out himself.
There was that spark. Eris hasn't changed that much after all, Nina thought. It was hard to imagine that this proud woman who now puffed out her chest was the same person as that wild animal from before, but still, Nina sighed and started unloading on Eris. You gotta listen to this. So Isolde?
In the end, Nina never quite figured out what the party was for. When she and Eris returned to the ballroom, they found Rudeus addressing the crowd. The dragon god Orsted is your ally. Act now, and we'll include this as our bonus gift absolutely free. Worry not, there's no fee for signing up. All we ask is that you simply gather your strength in preparation for some war in 80 years, and when the time comes, lend that strength to the dragon god Orsted. If you make this tiny commitment, the Orsted Corporation will guarantee its support for the next 100 years. The dragon god Orsted will save you in your darkest hour, from perils ranging from the prophecies of shady, godlike figures all the way to the terrors of home invasions. Please, a vote for the dragon Orsted is a vote for a bright future.
Nina couldn't quite follow what he was saying, so she simply nodded along. Rudeus seemed to be gathering allies. Assuming that their earlier encounter really was a misunderstanding, then she wasn't opposed to helping out Eris's husband. Nina didn't quite understand what he wanted, though. A war would break out in 80 years, so he wanted them to assist Orsted when that time came, which meant he wanted them to gather strength until then. This was a little elaborate.
Nina wasn't alone. Many other guests appeared to be similarly confounded, but in the end, everyone nodded. It probably helped that not a single person in that room would turn down a request from Ariel. After the party, Nina crashed at the mansion at Eris's suggestion. Isolde joined them. It turned out that the entire place was a gift that Ariel had provided to Rudeus, so they were free to use it as they pleased, or so went Eris's boast. That night, the three of them reunited for their first conversation together in years. Eris continued to talk about absolutely nothing but Rudeus, and even Isolde was grumbling about how she was starting to want a partner of her own. Seeing those two bounce off each other somehow reminded Nina of the old days. The contents of what they talked about might have changed a little, but the fun she had in their presence hadn't changed a bit. That alone made Nina's trip to the capital of Ars worth it, and by the time that the next day arrived, her silly senses of jealousy and defeat had waned. She felt like her old self. Nina sampled everything Ars had to offer, until the conclusion of the coronation's festivities. The sights, the crowds, the training halls. When she wanted to go somewhere, she went. And she didn't go alone. There were many days where Isolde couldn't join her due to work obligations, but for some reason, Eris stuck with Nina the whole time. Eris would blabber about Rudeus every time she opened her mouth, so Nina had to wonder why Eris wasn't sticking with her husband instead. But after spending so much time with her, Nina began to understand Eris's thought process. She wanted Nina to seriously accept Rudeus's proposition. Eris wasn't great with words, which made it hard to follow what her point was, but her earnest, straightforward spirit moved Nina's heart. Rudeus's request went from incomprehensible gibberish, so something she now seriously considered. Nina returned to the Sword Sanctum after the coronation finished. She did some thinking along the way about how she agreed to join Orsted's forces in 80 years, about how happy, bright, and cheerful Eris looked, and how Rudeus stood right next to her. She thought about them as she spurred on her horse. She didn't commit to it fully, but when she saw the person welcoming her as she pulled into the Sword Sanctum, something clicked into place. He was Nina's cousin, a young man who followed in her footsteps to become Sword Saint and was now on the verge of reaching Sword King, Gino Britz. Nina took one look at him and said the first thing that came to mind. There was no hesitation. The Sword God style preached that the first to make a move would be the victor for a reason.
Hey, Gino, wanna get married?
Shortly afterward, the Sword Sanctum was home to a new married couple, but that is a story for another time. Interlude, coming-of-age ceremony. Let us speak of my younger sisters. Norn was working hard as the student council president. For most students these days, she was the only person who came to mind when you mentioned the title. Then again, that might have been because most of the students around for Ariel's era had graduated. Norn was a popular president. A lot of the students would even call her Norny. Norn didn't seem to appreciate that, but hey, it was sweet. Ariel had the reputation of being a reliable president, but Norn had the reputation of being an approachable one. However, and this might have been her fan club's influence at work, she had zero romantic prospects. She was also treated as something of a mascot for the school, harmless, inoffensive, sexless. Of course, she worked hard at her studies as well. I heard that just the other day she was recognized as intermediate tier in Sword God style during her swordsmanship class. Her progress might have been a little slow compared to the people I knew, but I guess that was what normal people are like. She was also pretty studious about her magic, and she took plenty of other classes on top of it. I didn't know her exact syllabus, but the last time I popped my head into school, I overheard someone say, "Man, I see President Norn everywhere." She was never quite the best at anything, but she applied herself to a broad range of subjects to make up for it. Aisha was getting pretty stuck on Arus lately. While it was true that Eris's rough mothering skills had been showing up in Arus's behavior, Aisha found baby boys adorable, and so she doted on him. It looked like she had a favorite. She'd started a habit of saying, "Oh, Arus is so cute," lately, and I was not super sure what that meant exactly. Of course, pampering a baby is fine. There were some parts that worried me, that was all. Like, maybe she was into him a little too much. Just recently, when Ara started crying out of hunger, she exposed her own breasts to him and tried to get him to suck on them. Her defense was that she thought he'd stop crying if she gave him something to suck on, but I don't know. Aris did cheer up and start laughing while sandwiched in her boobs, so I could sort of understand where Aisha was coming from, but I was pretty concerned even so. When I thought about how she had nobody to expose her breasts to besides a toddler, well, you know, it was minor in the grand scheme of things. She was handling the mercenary band well. When I declared that the mercenary band would serve as Orsted Corporation's intel network and that it would span the entire world, she didn't even need to have it explained. She got to work gathering the necessary personnel, property, and negotiations to build branches in other nations. She was also good at keeping a leash on Linnea and Persena. Now, Aisha herself wasn't particularly gifted as a manager. I heard that she tended to come down particularly hard on the sort of unskilled employees who repeated the same mistakes time and time again. It was Linnea and Persena who brought out the best in those employees, of course. Hey, strengths and weaknesses. Aisha was the brains of the operation, and she was darn good at it. Now!
Both Norn and Aisha were approaching their 15th birthdays.
I don't mean to repeat myself, but this world treated every 5th birthday as a milestone that was met with great celebration, especially at age 15, at which point one was considered an adult. Nobles would frequently celebrate this with a massive party, the coming-of-age ceremony. To humans of this world, it was perhaps the most important day of their lives. I'm sure this needs no explanation as well, but I planned to celebrate both of their birthdays, and big time. I'd get a fat wad of cash from Orsted, blow it all on the biggest building money could buy, hit up every friend and bigwig I knew, get them to plop down sweetest gifts they could, and give those girls the complete princess treatment. And with that level of excitement, I brought it up to Roxy.
I don't know about Aisha, but I think Norn would be happier with something a bit more practical. Maybe you should rethink it.
Shot down. Basically, they weren't royalty, so a party at home would be plenty. Afterward, Roxy patted my head and said,
You want to go all out with their birthdays, because you never celebrated your own 15th birthday, right?
Nope, didn't give a damn about my 15th birthday, but hey, Roxy was giving me head pats, so who was I to object? I'm a good whittle boy. Moderation could be good in its way, though. Roxy opened my eyes to that.
For now, we should talk to the rest of the family to come up with a way to celebrate.
And so, we planned a secret family meeting with everyone but Norn and Aisha. We held the conference in the basement under the veil of night. The entire family, excluding Aisha and Norn, gathered around the dim illumination of a lone candle. Welcome, my accomplices, to the assembly of dark...
Rudy, could we get some more light? It's hard to write like this.
Our secretary, Roxy, interrupted my dramatic opener to complain. I wish she could have respected the mood. I mean, if there's light leaking out the door, then Aisha might notice us.
Why do we need to hide it to begin with?
I mean, what else would we do? Was this not something to hide? Like, a girl wouldn't want a boy finding out about what she planned for Valentine's Day, right?
It'll be much harder to prepare if we have to hide the fact that we're doing it. Unless we have a good reason. I'd much prefer we tell them in advance.
So, coming clean would make things easier on our end, too. Made sense. It was bound to be less stressful to prepare out in the open rather than do it in secret. They had a point. We didn't have to hide it. Now that I thought about it, my own 5th and 10th birthdays were surprise parties, so I had the preconceived notion that birthdays were meant to be planned in secret. Given what happened last time, Norn and Aisha had probably picked up by now that we were going to celebrate their birthdays. There wasn't any reason not to tell them. All right, we'll just tell them we're planning something. We might as well go whole hog. That way, there was less to worry about when buying presents. Aisha was friends with everyone in the shopping district, so if they thought I was being suspicious, they could wind up telling her, "Hey, Aisha dear, that brother of yours came by and bought some cute panties and blow our cover." Of course, I wasn't going to buy them panties. That was just an example. I certainly wasn't thinking about how I'd bought a pair of panties that I wanted to see on Sylphie only to have Aisha poke fun at me with a sly grin.
But we should at least keep the presents secret.
To which everyone nodded.
I agree, but I also think we should decide on what we're getting them so we don't all get them the same thing.
That was an excellent point. Given how popular the two were, they were certain to receive plenty of presents from plenty of people come their birthdays. Norn had the student council and her fan club, while Aisha had the mercenary band and the people from the shopping district.
So, let's discuss what everyone plans to get them while we're all here.
With that, the meeting's topic shifted to the contents of our presents. Everyone had already picked something out for the most part. Lilia would get a handkerchief for Norn and an apron for Aisha. Sylphie would get a book for Norn and a quill pen for Aisha. Roxy would get a custom-made set of armor for Norn and a magical gardening shovel for Aisha. Eris would get a baldric for Norn and a belt for Aisha. It looked like everyone put a lot of thought into their gifts. I'd done some thinking of my own. My plan was to give her a figurine of Paul, which I'd begun making just a few days earlier. Norn loved Paul. If there was anyone she wished could have been there to see her grow up, it was Paul. I might get one hell of a strange look for this gift, but hey, we'd cross that bridge when we got to it. But with Aisha, I was a bit lost. I didn't know what she wanted. I did know that she liked cute things. It might have been hard to imagine based on her rough, competent exterior, But she was obsessed with all things girly. She loved frilly clothes, sparkly accessories, and everything in between. Something like that would work as a gift, but she'd been earning consulting fees from the mercenary band as of late, so she bought what she wanted, when she wanted it. Enlighten me. What gifts made you all happiest when you came of age? I proposed to the women. Research was important.
It was quite a long time ago, but I received a hair accessory from my parents. It was their way of telling me to at least attempt looking ladylike.
That was Lilia. I didn't know what kind of person she was at 15, but I'd heard that she wasn't exactly the type for high fashion. She did grow up in a training hall.
I forgot what day I was born, so I have no... Oh, right! Ariel's group gave me plenty of stuff, like clothes and shoes.
So Sylphie's gifts were clothing-related. She typically dressed pretty plain and boyish, so they probably gave all that to her so she could at least dress up in private.
I don't have much. The Miga tribe never had that sort of custom.
Fair enough, Roxy. For the record, I did give her a hat as a wedding gift, so she could have given that as an example.
Let's see. I had Ruijerd recognize me as a warrior.
Eris did indeed get the thing. It was a bit too embarrassing to say out loud, but that was the first time Eris and I did the thing. You know, swapping uniforms. Speaking of which, Aisha did seem to be fond of me. Perhaps she'd be overjoyed to receive the thing. No, on second thought, I could never do that exact thing to Aisha. But perhaps it could be a nice present, as long as it didn't go so far as to end in the thing. We'd go to a seaside restaurant and have a toast to your beautiful eyes, delight our tongues with whatever whims the chef prepares, and give you a Cinderella night that comes only once in a lifetime. Just that thought made me a bit embarrassed. I can't decide on what to give Aisha.
Aisha seems like she'd be happy with anything if it came from you.
That might be true, but that made the choice all the more important. That was why I wanted to give her something that'd make her super happy. Maybe I should just shoot for a luxury gift? Like a 10K carat diamond. Orsted would tell me where to go if I asked. You could have told me to grab it from the belly of a behemoth, and I wouldn't have hesitated.
Why not give her whatever gift made you the happiest?
Roxy's suggestion made it all click for me. She was completely right. I see. Then that's what I'll do. I nodded deeply now that I'd found my answer. I knew what my present would be. After a few additional meetings, the preparations were underway. We told Norn and Aisha that we'd throw a birthday party for them, and to keep their schedules open for that day. The two were happy to hear it. I expected Norn to say, "I don't need anything," or something like that, but instead, she bowed her head and gave a sincere, "Thank you very much." It was rare to see Norn act so agreeable, but on second thought, she only ever snubbed me when we were at school. She had a reputation to uphold there, so maybe it was natural. I expected Aisha to be more straightforward and start jumping over how excited she was. However, she didn't. Instead, her eyes widened in surprise as she murmured, "Oh, right, I'm an adult now." A bit slow on the uptake. Given how smart she was, maybe something was on her mind. Perhaps I could take her aside during the party to give her some special adult lessons. Nah, let's not. I wasn't adult enough to call myself one with a straight face. If I started telling her what the world was like, anything I said would come back to bite me. Anyway, we gave them the heads up, so all that remained was to wait for the special day. The big day had finally arrived. Norn went to school, as usual.
I'll try to be back as early as I can.
Well, she must have been excited. Aisha left early in the morning to head to the mercenary band's office, but she was home by noon. It sounded like she finished her work early. I thought she would have come back carrying presents from the band members, but she came back empty-handed. You didn't get anything?
I did tell them it was my birthday. Maybe it's because they're beast folk and don't really know that custom.
That said, she did have plenty of people congratulating her, so she seemed in pretty high spirits. But did the shopping district people not give Aisha anything either? Well, I guess being a customer didn't make you family, but hey, not every present was something you could put a bow on. What matters is that you want to congratulate someone. It's the thought that counts.
Hey, big brother, Can I watch you set up?
Yeah, of course. Aisha sat right down in the dining room and watched absent-mindedly as we prepared the party. She watched Lilia and Sylphie go back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room. She watched Eris and Roxy return from their trip to the market carrying a mountain of groceries. She watched me pitch in with a little bit of everything in between, setting up the decorations. She watched it all, without saying a word. Being hovered over made it a bit harder to work, but she was the birthday girl, and I did tell her it was okay, so it was kind of hard to tell her to come back in the evening. That, and she really did just watch. Aisha didn't really say anything to interject, she just spaced out while we worked. Even when Zenith sat down next to her and started to pat her head, she said nothing and continued to watch. Even when Leo rested his head on Aisha's lap, she didn't pay him much mind and continued to watch. Even when Aru started crying, she only left her seat for a short while before she returned and continued to watch. Even when Lucy came by and asked her big sister Aisha if they could play together, she just smiled, said that she was a bit busy at the moment, and continued to watch. She watched, and that was it. I couldn't tell what she was thinking. Maybe she was contemplating everything that came with coming of age, or maybe she was chuckling at how clumsily we did our jobs. Either way, I couldn't tell. Eventually, dusk arrived. We completed all of our preparations under Aisha's watchful eye. The dining room was fully decked out. In a corner of the room was a mountain of wrapped presents that we planned to give to the girls. Atop the table was an array of shelf-stable foods. We planned to start making the main dish once Norn returned. All that was left was to wait for Norn. Was she running late? If she was going to be out for a while longer, it might have been best to pick her up. That's what I was thinking as Norn got home early, just as she'd said she would.
Hello. I'm home.
Norn's arms were wrapped around a huge, dangerously precarious bundle of presents. Her left hand carried a bouquet. Her right hand carried a wooden box stuffed with everything from patterned cloths to hair accessories to mysteriously shaped artifacts whose utilities I couldn't begin to surmise.
Sorry I'm late. People started giving me all this when I tried to leave. I planned to leave them in my dorm, but I couldn't fit them all into the closet. I thought I'd take these ones back to leave at home, but my bag ripped open on the way here.
It sounded like a diverse throng of people had burdened her with an equally diverse variety of presents. That was how many people at school wanted to wish Norn a happy birthday. Guess they didn't call her the approachable student council president for nothing. I just hoped none of her admirers gave her something creepy, like a cookie with a strand of hair baked in. Let's not think about that. We welcomed Norn home and got the party started at last. It was the same kind of birthday party I'd thrown for them a few years ago. I gave the opening speech. Being 15 didn't mean things would change overnight, but they were now adults in the eyes of society, or so my life advice went. It was the speech I felt unqualified to give, but wound up giving anyway. Somehow I'd gone into know-it-all mode. My tongue slipped. With that introduction out of the way, the other adults among us all talked about conducting yourself like an adult. Sylphie said that they wouldn't need to ask the family for permission anymore, but they'd need to be responsible. Roxy advised them to never stop learning. Eris told them they should always have a goal. Lilia seemed more emotional than usual. She talked about Paul and Zenith's younger years and the day the two girls were born while nearly sobbing. Zenith patted her head. Norn's face lit up into a smile when she saw the presents we gave her. She especially liked the armor that Roxy had asked a blacksmith acquaintance to make. Just for this day, Roxy custom-ordered a set of armor that looked just like Paul's old set, which now hung in Zenith's room. It was resized to fit Norn's body and restyled to have a more feminine look. When she equipped Paul's trusty sword to the baldric that Eris got her, she looked just like a full-fledged swordswoman. Those two might have remembered when Norn once said that she wanted to be an adventurer. She reacted to the bust of Paul that I made with, at first, outright confusion. I was proud of my work, but it was a 30-centimeter tall statue made of stone, so I understood where she was coming from. I didn't realize while I was making it, but it was what modern society would likely categorize as a dud gift. But this world didn't have photographs. After looking at the bust for a while, tears started welling in Norn's eyes, perhaps from the memories of Paul it brought back.
Asked. I'll treasure it,
she said as she finally accepted it. When we all finished giving out our presents, Norn addressed us.